side, Rania Kalik. Rania, great to be back with you.
It's good to be back with you, Eugene. I missed you. It's been a week.
I know. We took a brief week off there because we were working on some very exciting things, some good, interesting new things, some documentary work from Breakthrough News. So the team was spread all over the place, but we are back here on the freedom side. We've got a great show here tonight. We're going to be touching on many, many different things all around the world, from the politics of Israel to the politics of immigration in the United States to the so-called lab leak issue and everything surrounding that controversy, Peru, Mexico. It's all in there. It's all in the show. This is a perfect time, I would say, if you are watching, to go ahead and hit that share button so whoever's following you can follow us. If you're watching on YouTube, or if you're not, you should do this at some point. Make sure you hit the subscribe button, hit that bell so you can get the alerts. So every time we are going live and putting out any of the great work we do here at Breakthrough News, you will be able to catch it. So subscribe, hit the bell, and if you, at all possible, please share this stream right now. Rania, I want to just get into it here with our first guest, just dive right in. We are very happy to be joined here by the investigative journalist, David Sheen, as we start the show out here, turning, of course, to what I think many people have been seeing around the world in the aftermath of the war in Gaza, the changes in the Israeli government, or alleged changes. David, thank you so much for being with us again.
Thanks for having me, Eugene.
David,
please, Rania,
let's just... I was going to say, let's just get right into it. Why don't you start off by giving us an idea of what the latest is with the Israeli political games we've been watching? When do we find out who the next prime minister is? And does it really matter? Will it change anything in terms of the direction of Israel?
Okay. Well, we've got, 72 hours until we expect to have a new prime minister. Finally, after 12 years of Benjamin Netanyahu in office, it doesn't seem like he have any more dirty tricks up his sleeve. This is it. We only have a couple more days to wait on this. So what awaits us now? Is going to be any different, if anything? So the new prime minister is actually not the leader of the next biggest party. The next prime minister is in a shared power sharing agreement with that person, the person with the next largest party. The next prime minister is someone who only has 6 seats, maybe, in parliament out of 120, 5% of the electorate. How is it that Naftali Bennett is going to be Israel's next prime minister? Well, it's because he holds a pivotal position, which is he's on the border between Israel's largest political camp, the nationalists, let's say, those who support one apartheid state from the river to the sea, and the next largest camp, which is the eliminationist parties, the eliminationist camp, the religious parties who want that one apartheid state to be ethnically cleansed of non-Jews, ultimately. So Bennett is the head of the party that is just at the verge between the two. He's in the religious camp, the eliminationist camp, but not as extreme, let's say. He's somewhere on the border there. And because of that, those votes are pivotal, because for Netanyahu to have power all these last couple of years, as he's, finally being taken to court, not for the war crimes that he's committed in Gaza or, against African people or against Palestinian people, but rather against Israeli taxpayers, corruption crimes and manipulating the media. So as he's about to head to jail for that, we have a situation where all of his political partners that are secular, that are like him, nationalists, drop away, and he has only the religious parties left. So they needed one of those religious parties to complete the opposition. To get Netanyahu out, they needed at least one of those natural partners that Netanyahu has relied on all these years to stay in power. And so that's why this man with so few seats is going to be prime minister. What does this mean? It's Israel's first openly eliminationist prime minister. And what that'll mean? Well, in his own words, he said that when, of course, being attacked, Netanyahu was trying to outflank him from the right, saying, you're going to be a leftist government. You've got leftists in your government and such. He said, well, my government will be 10 degrees to the right of Netanyahu. So he's openly saying, I'm going to be more right-wing than Netanyahu. As I said, the eliminationist camp is who he represents at the head of. And just as an example of what that means, elimination light, to be not as extreme as some of the other members of his camp who would openly admit, yes, we need to ethnically cleanse the country of non-Jews. He will still promote a policy that ultimately would see that, but he would couch it in either religious terms or in Hasbara terms. Since he spent many years growing up in English, like Netanyahu, he has that eloquent speech. And so what he would say is that all those kids who died in Gaza in 2014, at the time he said that Hamas was committing self-genocide. So he was admitting that Israel was genociding the Palestinian people in Gaza, but he was just saying that the blame for that was not on the government who was shooting those rockets or artillery. It was the government in Gaza that was responsible for that genocide. So this is what it means to have, as prime minister, someone who is an eliminationist 10 degrees to the right of Netanyahu. And like I said, it's a power-sharing agreement.
I also want to remind...
Go ahead. Yeah, of course.
I also wanted to remind viewers with Naftali Bennett, who you're talking about, he also openly bragged about killing a lot of Arabs and said there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I guess that shouldn't be too surprising. It's kind of like, that is what makes you more popular, I guess, in Israeli politics. But he actually openly stated that, right?
Open our history books. Let's look at what happened in 1996. I don't want to go back too far, but we're talking about 25 years ago. But at the time when Bennett was in the army and actually killing Arabs, at that time, he called in an artillery strike to defend his position, which was inside southern Lebanon. And the Israeli army did so. And in doing so, killed 100 plus civilians who were being sheltered in a United Nations camp in southern Lebanon. So he literally has Arab people's blood on his hands. It's no exaggeration to say so. Right. This is Naftali Bennett. Shall we say a couple words about his power-sharing prime minister, or where y'all want to go?
Yes.
No,
go
please.
ahead.
I'm honestly still stunned about that story. Oh my God.
And he's sharing, it's interesting, he'll be sharing power with somebody who, the Americans are probably happy about, because he's, in the American point of view, from the American government's point of view, a liberal. So go ahead and tell our viewers about who Naftali Bennett will be sharing power with should he become prime minister.
You're so right, Rania. That's exactly it. In fact, the person who will be his foreign minister for the next 2 years and then eventually succeed Bennett as prime minister if everything goes as planned. Who knows if that'll happen, but if it does, the next prime minister after Bennett will be Yair Lapid, the head of the Yesh Atid party, with the next largest party in parliament after Netanyahu's ruling Likud party, or up to now ruling Likud party. And so you said that, in fact, the Biden White House will be happy, and they will. They already have shared advisors who advise both of those, both the Biden White House and Yair Lapid's parties. So it's obviously it's going to be very welcomed. And in fact, one thing that we can say about him is, just as how after Trump was finally, put out to pasture by the American people, instead of cleaning house and saying, okay, we need to have what we had, there needs to be like a total, complete ejection of anything that anyone that had to do anything with Trumpism, has to have no possible connection to any, power position ever again. So instead of doing that, he's like, no, we got to come together as a nation, bygones be bygones and all that. So the same thing with Yair Lapid, like one of the only, we can call them progressive activist groups in the country, Mechaskim, they were like, yes, finally Netanyahu's out. Let's fill Tel Aviv City Hall. There's like a big fountain in front of it. Let's fill it with water. And then as soon as Netanyahu's out, we all jump in and jump around, have a big ass party. So, and when you're heard, Lapid, the next prime minister after Bennett, when he heard about this, the Biden type, he's just like, no, we got to come together. We're not going to be filling up the pool. Like, God, we've been waiting for so long for this evil asshole to be out of power. At least let us have that, But no, we got to pull the country together. And so that's his vision, very Bidenian vision of the country. And as Israel's foreign minister, as Naftali Bennett's foreign minister in the next couple of years, he's going to be doing that, going to everywhere in the world saying, don't worry, Netanyahu-ism is over, Trump-ism is over. We'll continue pretty much the exact same policies, even 10 degrees to the right, but don't worry, you can trust us again. We're not guilty of war crimes. You can allow us to continue doing those war crimes willy-nilly. Please don't look here. That'll be Lapid's position for the next 2 years.
Wow. Well, so it sounds like ultimately, at least for Palestinians, nothing really changes. Like the policies stay the same, right? And that said, since you're talking about 72 hours here, I mean, can Netanyahu still pull a rabbit out of a hat? He hasn't seemed to have really given up. At least he's acting like he hasn't given up yet.
Wow.
Is it really over?
No, he's tried everything.
And ultimately, there's nothing else he can do. It's over.
Mm-hmm. Well, in recent days, I mean, he's really pulled out all the stops, and I'll give you just a sample of what that might mean. So as you may have heard, Israel's prime minister from 25 years ago was assassinated, Yitzhak Rabin, and he was assassinated because at that time they were starting to see if it would be possible to create some kind of what they thought might be a two-state solution. It turned into something grotesquely different from that, and even in the best case scenario. But the point was that because this Israeli prime minister took a step out of the mainstream idea of perpetual apartheid and said, let's have a two-state solution, give Palestinians just a quarter of the land of historic Palestine. For that, he was assassinated, and he was assassinated because the eliminationist camp, the rabbis who lead the eliminationist camp, that's 20% of the Israeli electorate, they incited so much against the prime minister to the point that some rabbis were saying it's a mitzvah, it's a good deed, it's like it's a commandment from God to kill this prime minister because he's killing us, So because in Israel you can incite as long as you use religious language. There are hate crimes, there is hate speech, there are rules on the book that prohibit it, but if you use religious language to do so, you're basically exempt from those rules. So you can do so to the point of inciting murder, even of a prime minister. So in recent days, we have the same kinds of ritual curses, Kabbalistic curses being performed and published about Bennett, even though he is the head of the eliminationist camp, but just because it will mean that some members of the eliminationist camp, some of the religious parties, the most extreme versions of them, will not have their hand at the till for the next couple of years, will not be able to keep, taking government funds for their religious projects. So for that, they are wishing death on Naftali Bennett, the head of the eliminationist camp, saying, take off your skull cap, take off your kippah, take off your skull cap. You're not really Jewish. You're not really religious. You're not good enough. And like I said, Netanyahu's been telling these rabbis, it's straight up reported in Israeli media, what they did to Moses when his leadership was challenged. And according to the fictitious literature called the Torah, in those stories of Hebrew literature, when Moses was challenged by Korach, then, according to, Yahweh killed Korach and his followers. So that's what Netanyahu is saying. Like, yeah, what happens? These guys got to die. They need to be killed. And this kind of discourse is what Netanyahu's come to. And it's not only that, he's also allowed the Kahanists, the Jewish political party that has murdered over 60 Palestinians in the last half century, it allowed them to run willy-nilly and to incite the streets and to organize race rallies and to, perpetuate anti-Palestinian pogroms, as we saw last month. So even all those efforts that Netanyahu is really pulling out all the stops to try to, turn the country into a feeding frenzy of, fear, where everyone's like, okay, Netanyahu's the only thing we know. He's stable. He's been leader. Let's just stick with him. Even like every trick in the book hasn't worked. Of course, it's succeeded in, escalating the inter-ethnic tensions in the country to stratospheric levels that were, of course, even before this, it was at stratospheric levels, but now even more so. Right. So that he's been very successful, but in terms of being able to leverage that to stay in power, even that didn't work in the end. Seemingly, Netanyahu in the last couple of days has said, well, it's time for me to position. He's not going anywhere. His party hasn't kicked him out yet. He'll continue to lead the opposition as the leader of the largest party, but that's what we're going from now on.
It's with Naftali Bennett, one thing I find interesting about him is that he is the son of two Americans from San Francisco who moved to Israel. Essentially, like they settled in Israel. They're essentially settlers. And he is like the product of that. And that just, he kind of is the embodiment of the kind of Israel that some people in the US prefer not to admit to. For some reason, Netanyahu is seen as like being maybe less extreme as him, but it almost sounds like what you're saying is Netanyahu in some ways is a bit more extreme, particularly with the alliances that he made. But David, I'm curious, what's the impact with all this happening? What's been the impact of the war on Gaza in popular opinion? Are people even talking about it, or is it just like completely in the rearview mirror? Was there anything about the aftermath of this war that's been different, at least in Israeli society, and particularly in terms of the aftermath of this, I guess, this internal uprising of Palestinians who are citizens of Israel and the sort of communal violence that went along with that? Is there any discussion or reflection, whether positive or negative, about that in Israeli Jewish society?
Okay. Well, truth to tell, most of the inner discourse has been about this crazy election process that we've been going in. Palestinian lives do not matter much, even when in recent days, we've been reading about insane pogroms happening in the West Bank. I don't want to go into details. We could be all day on details, but like really, really over the top, disgusting stuff. And it's barely been a blip on the Israeli media. People aren't even registering it. So no, Palestinians are very far from people's minds. They're mainly focused on the politics. But to understand, it seems like what you're asking is about like if Naftali Bennett is the head of the eliminationists, blah, blah, blah. But what about the kind of the mainstream or the consensus Israeli opinion or Jewish society in Israel? And I would say that we can look at a couple things to measure it, perhaps. So one of the things we saw this week was the election, not only, or the formation of a new government, but also the election of a president. Now, this doesn't exist in the US. You have a president, that's the leader of the country. Here it's the prime minister. The president is kind of like in Canada's governor general. It's mainly a figurative position, and they don't have a lot of power. They can, like the US president, they can lower someone's prison sentence and often do so. But besides that, it's mainly a ceremonial position. So who did Israeli Knesset members of the parliament, vote on to be Israel's president for the next 7 years? This just happened this week. The man they chose was the one who was the leader of the opposition to Netanyahu, the so-called liberal Zionist alternative. So the previous version of Yair Lapid from 2013 to 2018, the leader of the Labour Party, Isaac Herzog. So, this is you can't even pick a more consensus person. The votes they got were more than any previous election for president. In the Haaretz, there's a Haaretz article calling his family, the Camelot of Israel. It's more like the Windsor family of Israel. They never won an election. They're associated with colonialism. They're Irish Jews who moved here, and they, are thoroughly anti-miscegenation as much as the Kahanists are. Okay, it's like a multi-generational hate on mixed families that are Jewish and non-Jewish. One partner is Jewish, one partner is non-Jewish. Just as Isaac Herzog, a couple of years ago, in the first day of his new job, leading the Jewish Agency, which is kind of a peristyle group that has ridiculously been called the Prime Minister of the Jews, like all Jews in the world. So for the last 3 years, according to Judaism, he's been the Prime Minister of the Jews in his own mind. And on his first day in office, as he leads his opposition in the Israeli parliament and becomes the head of the Prime Minister of the Jews, he says, we've got to stop miscegenation. I go to America to visit my friends there, Jewish friends that I met 20 years ago, and they're like, oh my God, their kids, some of them date non-Jews and some of them marry non-Jews and live with non-Jews. Oh my God, it's like every Jewish family. There's like millions of them. Like, oh my God, Jewish penises and non-Jewish vaginas, Jewish vaginas and non-Jewish penises. What are we going to do about it? We must find a solution. He called us a
This
plague.
is the liberal. This is the liberal
alternative to Netanyahu for 5 years. Okay? So this level of over-the-top racism is 100% normalized in Israel. It's a consensus view that this is the nationalist camp. This is 60% of the Israeli electorate, to say nothing of the 20% of eliminations that are. So it's 80% who share this view. And it's so common that not only did, Isaac Herzog, push for this, on the day one of his new job, like advertising what he cares about so that people will feel better about him being Prime Minister of the Jews. Don't worry, I'm going to fight miscegenation. But, sickeningly, his grandfather, who he's named after, who was the chief rabbi in Palestine in the 1940s, he started like the 1940s version of Lehava, of these anti-miscegenation squads, the Committee for the Protection of the Honor of Jewish Women. and they would like make lists of which Jewesses were married to non-Jews, and like these women, they made the death of them. They, harassed them, harangued them, they beat them, they tortured them. Some cases they killed them. None of the people who ever participated in these like disgusting race attacks ever were investigated, let alone tried and convicted. Okay, so this is like multi-generational hate on mixed families. It's like racial purity is totally the normal ethic. So that's Israel-centered. And I think it's very instructive to understand who Israel just picked as its popular president. That gives you some insight into Israeli society. And we come to Bennett, the prime minister. Of course, he's supported anti-miscegenation efforts all these years. Is it any surprise if even the so-called liberal Zionists do so as well? Something to think about.
It's really disturbing. It's like every time, we have you on, it's always a pleasure to have you on, David, but it's always very disturbing because it just feels like there's no obstacles to prevent these goals, these really eliminationist goals, ultimately, that most people seem to share. Just perhaps they have different ideas about how to carry it out. That said, is there, what can people, I guess, outside of Israel do? It seems like there's no checks within the country. So what can people who are horrified by what they're witnessing do, who are on the outside of all this, just like looking in disgust?
Well, I try to limit myself to try to, understand what I'm looking at and to convey that, as opposed to being, to give what I recommend that people would do. But I would agree in the sense that it seems that there's no levers. Yes, even if we have, let's say, I'll be generous, 20% of the electorate who wants to see a different direction, wants to pull back from this, descent, downwards, but that's not enough. 20% of the society. Of course, if everyone was counted, if all Palestinian people had equal rights, then it would be 50-50. People would have to come together, and there would be many more mixed families if we were allowed to have mixed families, and that was even a possibility in this semi-theocracy. But I think that, as you said, it needs to come from outside. Now, what do people outside need to do? It's very difficult because the discourse is dominated by people who gaslight anyone like yourselves who are, asking questions and showing a different perspective other than the Zionist narrative. This has been going on for decades. And so it doesn't seem that until, I can't imagine that in the near future. I think there's some people who are making great efforts at trying to bring, I'll just give you one small example. We talked about the anti-miscegenation movement just now. Well, the number one funder of Israel's anti-miscegenation squads, Lehava, is the same number one funder as those Death to the Arabs flag marches that we discussed in Jerusalem, the annual marches in Jerusalem, the Death to the Arabs marches, the same funder, and also that funder as Israel's prime minister for the last 12 years, Benjamin Netanyahu. All of these are the top funders of each of these are the phallic family. They're just a gajillionaire American Jewish family who funds all these, various levels of Israeli racism. And so just last week, I saw Jewish Voice for Peace, a progressive Jewish group in the United States, had a protest, also, with folks in solidarity with them, did a protest in front of the business that's owned by the phallic company. They own a large business, and they protested there in front of them to say, call them out. These people are funding apartheid, ethnic cleansing. These people are evil, and naming and shaming them. I think things like that could potentially, if we start calling out the racists, then that, starts to change the discourse. But it was a very, very small protest. Let's see 100, let's see 1,000, let's see more people out there in the streets protesting, pointing the fingers at the people who are funding this. Yes, there are plenty of racists on this side of the Atlantic, but a hell of a lot of people on your side, well, y'all side over there, Rania's over here, but y'all side out there, you guys are there's so much money besides the political support in Congress. There's also a lot of funding that comes this way, and to be able to point back at those people, say this is what you're supporting, that could go a way to changing people's minds about it. I think most people don't realize the extent, partly because the discourse here is in Hebrew. I'm doing what I can to translate stuff into English. But ultimately, if I could plug for 1 second, I would just say that there is no media in this country that supports, let's say, a one-state vision, where they see everyone in the country as equal. They believe that the country should be shared by everyone equally. Everyone should have equal rights in the country. There are newspapers that promote the apartheid view, promote the ethnic cleansing view. We have Haaretz, Israel's only real broadsheet newspaper, and they represent the liberal view, the two-state solution view. But those who believe in a one-state solution, they don't have press, not in English, not in Arabic, not in Hebrew, not online, not in print, not in any fashion. So that just closes off many stories and also many opportunities to understand what's actually happening here. People need to people have to start funding that, in my humble opinion. But that's my little personal plug.
Well, David Sheen, investigative on-the-ground journalist, thank you once again for joining us on the Freedom Side on Breakthrough News to give us a breakdown. David, one of the best journalists, especially for what's happening within Israel itself. Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
Thank you so
Thanks
much
for having me. Take care, Young. Take care.
Yeah. I mean, Rania, you said it. I feel like every time we talk about this, I learn so many things that I'm just shocked. And real quick, just want to shout out in the super chat, solidarity from Bristol. I'm assuming that's Bristol, UK, since those are pounds. So shout out to you. It's late over there. So thanks for watching. Great show, guys. Any chance of progress on equal rights for Palestinians, stopping the ethnic cleansing of Jerusalem and houses being demolished? Well, I think David really maybe gave the best answer to that. I think the question is, is there going to be resistance in around the world, especially in countries like the United States that are financially backing these countries, because clearly inside of the Israeli politics there's not that much going on. But
no, it's really
yeah.
It's really
well, I was just going to say to stay in the region.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, please go ahead. No, don't let me.
I was just going to say it's up to. I
I
think the power on the issue of Israel lies in those outside of it. Obviously, when we hear these updates from David, it's very clear that things in Israel are not going to change on their own. It's going to come from the countries that support Israel and their populations demanding an end to that. But please go ahead, Eugene.
No, well, I just wanted to raise something also in the region that you highlighted to me today, since we're talking about Israel, and obviously one of the biggest scare tactics Netanyahu had been using to try to torpedo this new government was to say, well, they won't be able to stand up to Iran. And there's sort of a mini saga right now with Iran and Venezuela. I guess sanctions really maybe is the unifying theme. But for those who haven't seen it, there's, I think, one, maybe two Iranian ships that are going from Iran to at least allegedly Venezuela. I guess that's not actually confirmed, but it appears to be the case. The rumors are that they are carrying weapons that Venezuela had purchased from Iran. That, of course, is not known, but that's what they're saying. Iran is only saying that, they have, as all countries do, and they are in fact correct, the right to, go where they want in terms of the open seas. That, and actually, right, that's what the U.S. says about the Strait of Taiwan. I mean, apparently, if you're the U.S., you can go wherever you want, but if you're Iran, you cannot. But nevertheless,
the
U.S. is
everywhere is your territory.
Yes, exactly. China, Africa, Latin America, it's all fine. And they're sort of intimating that they may attack these ships, saying that they have the right to, do whatever they want to do. Then there's other rumors that are out there that are talking about how, well, there is negotiations potentially going on, that they're talking to other countries in the region, trying to get them to do something. So perhaps trying to spark a regional war. Then, maybe to bring this all the way back, there's also at least some reports that the government in Venezuela is saying, well, if you don't want us to have these ships, and I don't know if this is true, this is just what they're saying, that if you don't want us to let these ships dock, you need to reduce the sanctions on the United States. But I mean, it really just boils down to so many things, is that these two countries are so closely linked. I mean, for many reasons, but in the past few years, because they're probably, along with North Korea, I guess the three most sanctioned countries on earth. You could probably throw Cuba in there too. And, the relationship, though, between Iran and Venezuela has become very tight because of that. And their economy is a little bit more interlinked. Of course, it's Iran really one of the few countries really helping Venezuela with their oil industry. And here's the United States. I mean, two sovereign nations. And here's the United States telling one of them, well, you can't actually bring a ship where it's totally legal for you to bring a ship. You also can't sell anything to anyone we tell you not to sell. And if we don't like what you're doing with your ships or what you're selling to other people, we'll just sink the ships, even though it will be hundreds of miles away from the United States. And of course, no threat to the United States. But the way it's presented as if this is some sort of nefarious thing where Iran is going to use Venezuela as a launching pad for long-range missiles into the United States, rather than a story of two countries that are being choked to death by U.S. sanctions.
Yeah, I mean, that's essentially what's happening here, right? Iran and Venezuela are, like you said, being choked to death by U.S. sanctions. And Venezuela has it even worse. Venezuela, we know, has the most oil in the Western Hemisphere, which is one of two big reasons why it's targeted by the United States. The United States wants that oil. But also Venezuela, like Iran, which also sits on a top of a lot of oil, refuses to submit to American hegemony. And that's the only reason that these two countries are being punished. In the case of Venezuela, what's so outrageous is, like I said, sits on top of the biggest oil reserves in the Western Hemisphere, yet has fuel shortages. And Venezuela doesn't have fuel shortages because, as the US says, it's mismanagement by the Maduro regime or whatever the State Department's constantly saying. It's because it's under such extreme sanctions, which include the blocking of Venezuela's ability to refine its oil. So Venezuela cannot get the chemicals that it needs to refine its oil. That's why Venezuela, sitting on top of these massive oil reserves, has no fuel. And what's so outrageous about this policy of denying Venezuela the ability to refine its oil is it's led to food shortages because they can't transport food. There's trucks that run out of fuel on the highway. They can't.
And they're also sanctioning all the countries that companies that deal with food. I mean, right now, Alex Saab, of course, who's a big Colombian Venezuelan businessman, is being basically illegally held in Cape Verde in Africa because the U.S. is trying to extradite him. But in Turkey as well, also there's a number of companies that have also been sanctioned. And, they have openly said that they're going after the CLAP program, which is a government program that distributes food to millions and millions of people on a regular basis. So this is actually not even really a hidden factor in the U.S. sanctions. And they talk about it all the time, how they want to sort of cripple the government and cripple its ability to do these things. But, it's taken a program that's giving, I think it's between 6 and 10 million people food on a regular basis and turn it into basically an irregular program because they're unable to get a lot of the inputs because everywhere they go to buy food anywhere in the world, the U.S. tries to disrupt it.
It's a policy of starvation. We should just start calling it what it is. These sanctions are policies of starvation. It's taking food out of the mouths of Venezuelan children, of Iranian children, of Syrian children, all of these countries that are suffering from U.S. sanctions. And what's amazing is, this isn't the first time it's happened where Iran sent a ship to help Venezuela. It happened during the Trump era too. And there was a little bit more outcry. But under Biden, no one's saying anything about Venezuela. It's just been this maintaining of this policy of just continuing to starve and de-develop and destroy the country to try to force it into submission. And that's what, again, all of these crippling sanctions are about. You have the same situation in Syria right now, which is right next door to me, where people don't have fuel. There's no electricity. Again, Syria is in the most oil-rich area of the world, in the Middle East, and there are fuel shortages. That is a man-made problem made by the United States sanctions. Furthermore, the U.S. is occupying a huge portion of Syria through its Kurdish proxies. They have taken over an area of Syria that is the most oil and wheat rich. So it's denying Syria its own breadbasket in addition to its own oil. I mean, it's completely outrageous. And now that Biden's president, no one's even talking about it. People are literally just starving in Syria. Children are malnourished in Syria. That's never been a problem in Syria before. And everybody's too busy online complaining about something Ilhan Omar said. I mean, it's just completely outrageous.
It really is. Well, Juan in the booth, are you out there in the ether somewhere? We haven't seen you yet this evening.
He's there. I'm here. I'm sorry about that.
Look at that.
Sorry about the technical difficulties.
New spot, new location.
We changed it up.
New year, new cheer.
We changed it up.
Juan, how you feeling?
I'm good. It's been a good couple of weeks. The Nets have been killing it. The Nets have been killing it. I don't know if you saw.
The Nets have been killing it. Your boy Kyrie getting a little political there. In the game.
Yeah, but like Kyrie has been about it. But I do want to show a clip real quick. Sorry, Ryan, I'm about to boot you out for 1 second.
Election coming up.
It's okay.
No, I'm gonna show. I want to show. Yeah. Let me pull that up now. So the mayoral race. I unfortunately I sat through all of it.
Yeah, I mean, you may be one of the few people.
I sat through all of it multiple times.
Because you hate yourself, Juan. I don't understand why.
No, I just like
you're a concerned citizen.
I just like, I love my city, and like, I want to know which one of the many fools are the ones that are going to be in charge.
It is Keystone Cops. I don't want to say this before the video, but the big scandal that dropped this week about one of the candidates is also just chef's kiss of scandals. What was the scandal? Talk about it before the clip. Oh, the Eric Adams? Oh, so the Eric Adams, who's allegedly the front runner. So it comes out that it looks like he lives in New Jersey, not New York. So people kept saying, can you prove that you live in New York, not New Jersey? Because it's like written down on paper that he owns this apartment in New Jersey and lives there with his partner. So he was like, yeah, come to my house. I'm going to do like a tour. So he brings the media to his house, to a townhome that like he owns, it's on tax records. Although it does seem like there was like another tenant on a lease. But anyway, it's like, so, you think this is the Brooklyn borough president, that he would be living in the upstairs of the townhouse. You know what I mean? But no, he takes them into the basement apartment where, I mean, could it be where he lives? Yes, but the bed looks like someone actually just brought it in there like maybe that day. There's a lot of internet sleuths noting how some of the shoes that were lined up appeared to be his son. His son, who's a lot younger, was also there. So it's unclear what happened, but it does seem like it's possible Eric Adams lives mainly in New Jersey, but owns an apartment that he lets his son live in New York. So it's unclear exactly what was going on, but it's low-key become one of the most New York thing you could do to live in New Jersey. Like the rent is skyrocketing. Yeah. I mean, Eric Adams has no problems with it, but he should be in Brooklyn, right? It just feels like if you're the Brooklyn borough president, he should be in Brooklyn. You should definitely be in Brooklyn, but we'll see how it shakes out. He claims that it's not happening, but we'll see. I'm gonna bring up some clips. I'm gonna fast forward through. Is this from the last debate? This is from the last debate. I'm gonna fast forward through some of it just because we have a little bit less time. No, it's okay.
Good evening. I'm Catherine Garcia. I want to make sure that you understand that I'm the only person on this stage who will be able to deliver on every promise she makes. So, like, you have to convince me that she's not a robot. Like, you have to. Hello, I am Catherine Garcia. It's definitely a program delivery. And she's just like eyes locked on the camera right there. Just eyes locked. Like, you can just kind of feel like in the control room. You know what I'm saying? That they're saying it's all going perfectly there. And then there's a little pause. Did someone take a sip of water instead of hitting the right button? I don't know. No, that's just her. Like, oh yeah, the controls. I remember I was like at home and I was like on my phone like multitasking while I was listening to it, and her voice came on and I was just like it just called me. I was like, Siri? You deserve someone with the vision, the hustle, and the experience to get the job done.
New York City is at a crossroads, and there's one path, which is the path where we try to crawl our way back to January 2020 and tinker with things. But there's another path, a path where we have the courage to recognize that this historic moment is one in which we can remake our city.
All of my opponents here have been in government for decades. They have failed to fix any of the problems that are most important to you. This is a bad movie, playing out at City Hall with the same characters. We simply cannot afford a disastrous sequel.
That's unbelievable, actually. That from Ray McGuire, that's who that is, Ray McGuire, by the way. Okay, so everyone else has been in government. He's a Wall Street banker. Yeah. I mean, it's just, you want to talk about it not doing the things that matter to you. You want to talk about someone who hasn't been doing the things that matters to average everyday people. I would actually put Wall Street bankers ahead of politicians. Politicians have done very little, but they have almost certainly done more for the average person than Wall Street bankers have. And it's really amazing. In fact, his ad that he has all over Hulu, all over TV, is like he spent his adult career giving back and helping people, and it just doesn't mention that.
It makes no sense. It makes no sense. It makes no sense. And it's like, it's really like what like the city is like the options are so, you know, few and far between. Yeah. Like I don't want to say like they're I feel like we've had worse options at different points, but we literally have like a cop, we have a Wall Street banker, like we have
MSNBC host.
We have people that
who worked for De Blasio, who's considered, you know, basically a failed mayor. I mean, it's just unambitious. It's just for the largest city in America, obviously the most iconic city in America, one of the most iconic cities in the world. Like nobody really is proposing anything more than the status quo. Although there is a lot of rhetoric, there's no doubt about that.
Defunding the police is not the right approach for New York City. The fact is we have 5,000 or so police officers who submitted retirement papers. So we need to go on a massive recruitment drive. If you want to help make your community safe, you should apply to the NYPD. We need to have a police force that...
The gang is the blue gang. Like, there's no, at this point...
Yes, the Blue Lives Matter. I don't even have the stat in front of me, but I talked about this like 3 shows ago. That guy who joined the Baltimore police after the uprising in 2015, it was like that kind of guy, like, oh, we're going to be the change maker in Baltimore, who then had like dozens and dozens of cases against him for police brutality. But yeah, that's Andrew Yang. You want to change New York, you know, become a cop.
Become a cop. And that's the same thing, like in the middle of the uprising, the New York Times had like a opinion piece. It was like, if you want to change the police, become a police.
Reflects our great city.
And I'm actually really struck by the fact that no one on this stage has talked about the fact that we can't actually decouple the increase in crime, whether it's gun violence or other crime, from the increased insecurities that New Yorkers have faced and encountered over the last 15 months. Our government has fundamentally failed to provide housing security, to provide food security, to provide economic...
So I put this clip because, like, honestly, like, I feel like this was the only time that this was spoken about during the entire debate. Like, there was a big part of it that was, like, crime, people talking about, like, crime rates, more police. You know, your boy Eric Adams was all about that.
Yeah, it's the biggest issue.
Yeah, it's the biggest issue right now. But let me fast forward a little bit. I wanna show, you know, people in the comments were already talking about how I was gonna blame Andrew Yang for the technical difficulties, but I just want to.
Well, I thought you were gonna say that Diane Morales didn't pay you on time, so that's why you couldn't get it done.
Oh no. You know, you know.
Too soon?
No, I don't think it's too soon. I find it funny that people, and like this might be a hot take, but like I think it's funny that people expect somebody who ran a nonprofit to then like be the most progressive candidate, period. Because like if you have to run a nonprofit, your job is like not to be the most progressive person. It's to like figure out budget stuff, is to figure out cutting, how do you get grants? Like that's what she's gonna bring into it. If she is able to like do anything, if she wins. Right? Because I feel like...
so one of those things where you say a lot of stuff, but like how much of it are you really going to realistically get done? And I feel like you always have this candidate in these Democratic races that is saying the right things, but is rarely really addressing like, well, how are they actually going to get from point A to point B? And there's a lot of questions. There's a lot of questions about all of these people, to be honest with you. That's the problem, is you can't really trust any of them. They all have these very shifty records. I mean, people are hating on Diane Morales. Obviously, there's a controversy over her not paying her staff. That nonprofit was also a nonprofit owned by a slumlord. You got Eric Adams, who has corruption scandals as a cop. You got Andrew Yang, who, you know...
Who is the most relatable... He's actually the most relatable candidate. If you...
I have the experience that a lot of New Yorkers can relate to, which is that I owned and operated a small private company that then grew to become #1 in the country. And if you...
Who can relate to that?
Operated a small private company that then grew to become #1 in the country. And if you've ever run a business...
it grew to be... so relatable. And the thing is, it didn't even grow to be #1 in the country. That's like the controversy is it didn't even really do that much. But like if that is the that everyone can relate to. That's sad. That's very sad.
I'm gonna bring Rania back on. I do want to show one clip, and I want Rania to react to it also. It's gonna be very...
Okay, I'm ready.
It's not about the debates. But
is this a hard pivot?
It's a hard pivot.
Is this Cat Williams?
It's Cat Williams.
Ah, Cat Williams.
All right.
Cancel culture. Rhonda's favorite topic.
Yeah, it's on cancel culture.
Rhonda's been canceled, and she occasionally will cancel somebody.
Yeah, I'm always reading Bari. You know, me and Bari Weiss were like this.
You cancel people, Rania?
Did you lose your hairdresser?
I had to step off. I had to step off the show for a moment because I had to text Bari. We were just talking about how hard life is for her. Because she can't.
Let me know how I can subscribe to your Substack too. Then hopefully
she couldn't find a hairdresser who wasn't an anti-Zionist. It made her feel very.
All right, I'm gonna bring this clip on.
Okay.
Where do you stand on comics' ability to be comics without judgment and repercussion from cancel culture?
If you ask all of the people that didn't make it to the NBA, if you ask them if we just lowered the goal down another foot, they will all tell you they make it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody likes the out of bounds, but the out of bounds gotta be there, or you'll run up in the stands, right?
Mm-hmm.
So some of these things are for the benefit of everything. Nobody likes the speed limit, but it's necessary. Nobody likes the shoulder of the road, but it's there for a reason.
Mm-hmm.
My point is, people weren't all that extremely funny back when they could say whatever they wanted to say.
I mean,
okay,
Rania, what do you know? I guess Juan didn't want my opinion. You wanted Rania's opinion. So
No, I want both of your opinion. I brought it up.
Well, he was trying to reincorporate me into the program because you guys were talking local politics.
Yeah.
And I'm not in New York, so it was kind of rude. I mean, New Yorkers always do this, man.
We're in New York. We had to talk about New York. We had to talk about
everybody outside of New York.
12 million people.
Insider baseball.
We got to talk about Blake Griffin dunking on people.
Like we had.
So if I understood that correctly, I like how I just had to move on because I didn't know what you're talking about.
Yeah,
if I understood that correctly, was he saying that like it's good when comics go? Wait, I actually didn't really understand what he was saying.
No, he was so basically he was being asked.
Head.
He was being asked what he thought about cancel culture and like the way that comics had to deal with it. And his answer was that like he is not upset about it. That like as times change, and he goes on and says a little bit later that like cancel culture was something that was like brought to, like was more of an accountability culture that was brought on by like poor Black and brown folks that were like fighting to be acknowledged of different oppressions. So he was saying that stuff doesn't bother him because as a comic, he was talking as a comic, like. If things get a little bit harder and there's things that he can't talk about, then he just makes more material instead of complaining about.
So like, I don't even know if it's even worth going that far because I think that this whole conversation about cancel culture for comics is not even a thing anymore because most comics are actually making their names by being like the most subversive and like trying to get canceled, and almost every comic now, like it's getting boring because everything is about making fun of cancel culture. Like it's just at this point, it's become something that actually makes you famous. Like, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
That's all comics do now. Almost every bit that's even remotely political is just making fun of cancel culture and like snowflakes. But so I think maybe you could make that argument that like 5 years ago or 10 years ago, that was like a thing. But now, like every famous comic I see, especially famous white comic, is like all they're doing is just being as offensive as they possibly can be, and that's why they're famous. So I just, I don't.
Yeah. But I feel like
generally so much of an issue.
I feel like generally, like the cancel culture aspect of things doesn't really like even when it's not comics. I feel like even people that do the stuff that we're doing. Like the whole thought of like being canceled, like you have like a bunch of right wingers that they have their base, like they're not really being canceled. Yep. There's a small circle of people that will be upset, and like when I say a small circle of people, is like people that are online that will be upset. But if you talk to the majority of people, they won't even know that somebody's canceled or that somebody said something that was like off cuff.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. All right, well.
Oh yeah, I guess it's not that important of a conversation.
Yeah,
we gotta.
Well, I did I not say that you love to talk about cancel culture? We're gonna move on to something that's real and serious.
Eugene's trying to cancel me for shame.
Rania's
in a way, I am canceling you. Although you're still allowed to stay on the rest of the show.
You should put in the lower third. Lower third should read Rania canceled.
People would want to be tuning in to be like, "Oh, what happened? What did she say?"
Like, whoa,
anyway,
it's a way to get clicks.
We will bring it to you when Rania is canceled. Anyway, let's turn to someone who maybe should be canceled.
Wait, when?
The Vice President of the United States, who Kamala Harris, who has raised a whole host, just really poked the hornet's nest, if you will, by making some really disgusting comments in Guatemala. And before we get to her comments, I just want to note and bring in our next guest, who we are very happy to have with us, Sema Hernandez, who's a human rights advocate, also an activist, also a former U.S. Senate candidate, a daughter of immigrants, a resident of the state of Texas. Sema, thank you so much for being back with us.
Oh no!
Very.
Oh, you might be muted.
Oh, there we go.
Serious project.
Nope, we hear you now. We hear you. That was quickly fixed.
No, now we got you. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, great, good. All right, well, thank you for joining us. I appreciate it. Sorry for those tech difficulties. Before we get into it, Sema, just for people who may somehow not know what's going on with Kamala Harris, I wanted to play this clip that is her speaking in Guatemala, addressing the issue of immigration there in her first trip abroad.
I want to be clear to folks in this region who are thinking about making that dangerous trek to the United States-Mexico border. Do not come. Do not come.
Wow.
I mean, yeah. And I don't. Maybe I shouldn't be shocked, Sema, but it was such an outrageous set of statements and seemed so hypocritical. I mean, your thoughts when you heard this?
I was sincerely appalled by what she said, because there was more to the comment. She even added that she believed that they will be turned away. The United States immigration laws will turn them away, and they will use that to turn them away. However, she is misrepresenting intentionally seekers and telling them to not come to this place.
Okay.
Well, I don't know. We might have some
problem.
Yeah, we might have some audio issues here, maybe some video issues here. Just working that out with the internet. But if you're just tuning in, this is the Freedom Side. Just checking here. We're trying to see what we may have lost. We're talking to Sema Hernandez here, discussing the broader issue of.
It looks like she's having some signal issues.
While we're getting that worked out, I did want to. I was wondering if we could, because everybody who was tuning in, we just played that clip of Kamala Harris. That's what everybody's been talking about all week in Guatemala, telling people in Central America, do not come to the U.S. And I thought it'd be a good idea to juxtapose that with what she said a few years ago. When Trump was president, do we have that tweet of hers where she's like in front of the White House and she's bragging about, or she's basically, like speaking out against Trump's
it was doing
policies.
like sort of the no ban, no wall moment. And, obviously they were trying to capitalize.
No ban, no wall. We welcome immigrants. And the reason I bring that up is because, that was 2017, right? That's when it was opportunism to use these issues to be against Trump. And people like us, we use that time to say, you know what? Democrats are being hypocrites because under Obama, they were completely silent when their president deported more people than every other president combined, right? He deported over 2 million people. They call it, the Latino community called him the deporter in chief. And Democrats were silent because it was their team doing it. And it goes even beyond just their team doing it. This is a bipartisan consensus. The immigration enforcement, border patrol policy that we all came to hate in the Trump era wasn't a creation of Donald Trump. He was literally just continuing a system that had been built by Democrat and Republican administrations before him. They all enforce the same cruel system that is designed to deter people from coming to the United States by making the journey across the desert as dangerous and as deadly as possible, intentionally.
Mm-hmm.
It's called deterrence by death. That is literally
Yep.
the whole point of the border apparatus, is to push people into the most deadly terrain so that more people die, so that people back in Central America, back in Mexico will hear how dangerous it was and they won't come. And of course,
Yeah.
these people are fleeing what? They are fleeing destructive US economic and destructive US war policies. They're fleeing, decades of death squads and de-development and all kinds of, policies that are forced onto these countries in the global South that intentionally push people into destitution. And they have no choice and intentionally create the conditions for violence, whether that's gang violence fueled by the US drug war. Oh, perfect. Because she can talk about this way better than I can, but it's completely outrageous. Sema,
Excellent.
You're back.
Hi, yes, I guess we had a terrible internet connection. Now I'm on my phone, so I hope there isn't a lag.
Well, the connection.
No, you're great.
Fantastic.
You're great. I appreciate you sticking with us. So when we left off, you were just giving us your impressions upon seeing Vice President Harris in Guatemala make these comments telling people not to come.
Yeah, and reiterate again how disappointed I am in what she said, but it was intentionally misleading and misrepresented the international and asylum laws that we have in the United States. So she intentionally said, and if you play that clip a little bit longer, she says that she believes that the United States immigration system, Customs and Border Patrol, are ordered to turn them away. However, she is intentionally misrepresenting the laws here in the United States when it comes to immigration law and asylum seeking. People who are coming to the United States have the right to seek asylum without having to be criminalized or deported or separated from their families. They have a right to apply for asylum within 1 year of arriving at the port of entry. And she is intentionally misleading people and having them stay in a place where we know it's been destabilized by the United States. We know it's been hit several times by multiple hurricanes, multiple disasters. And there is no way that people can stay there and have a sustainable life in those countries, which is why they leave and they flee and they take that treacherous journey, very dangerous journey to the United States. That's just like the top of what I thought intentionally, because I heard her words. She said, I believe. That's misleading. She is the vice president, for goodness sake. She was the California Attorney General. She's an attorney. She's a lawyer. She knows the laws. So why is she telling people that she believes that they will be turned away when we know, those of us who know immigration law and have studied it for some time and representing and advocating for immigrants' rights and undocumented people in this country, we know that people have the right to seek asylum. I know that and I don't even have a law degree. So why is she misleading, intentionally misrepresenting the immigration laws and asylum laws in this country?
I mean, I felt like it showed the face of the Biden administration to a degree, especially when you put it with some of the other statements, like Biden making the statement to folks in Haiti to not come, that they're, despite constantly saying root causes is going to be their approach. Then, they make these speeches where it's honestly feels like the same thing as Trump. It's just like, just don't show up here. And then they have the nerve. And this is the thing that I feel like is so key to me, Sema, is, we look at Central American policy historically and contemporarily. They're saying we're going to give $100 million or whatever to the government of Guatemala and Honduras, which, I mean, they are the reason people are leaving because of the nature of these right-wing governments and their alliances. I mean, it just seems to make a mockery of the social conditions that people are living in Central America.
I think, and I believe that a lot has not been said in a lot of these press conferences that she's been holding with foreign leaders from Guatemala to Mexico. And it's a failure of acknowledgement and responsibility of the United States, not taking responsibility for the things that they've done, that they have orchestrated in installing these right-wing governments, these right-wing coups. They have been part of the destabilization in those countries that forced people to make that journey to the United States. So this administration is sending Kamala Harris, Vice President Kamala Harris, down to a region, and she is the first woman of color, the first woman to be a vice president. And it is more of this blatant tokenization of an identity to tell people of color that are coming to this country, telling them to stay there, to not come. Do not come to the United States. When she herself is a daughter of immigrants, she herself benefited from her family coming to this country. She herself has shown that she can be the vice president for no other reason other than she is a woman of color. When it comes right down to it, that is why she is the vice president. She really doesn't have anything remotely progressive or humanistic about her approach when addressing policies that we know are inflicted on people of color in other countries that, as Rania said, those countries own a lot of oil. They have a lot of resources that the United States wants to get. So what better way to take over those reserves, those resources, than destabilizing a country, forcing people to flee, and forcing those same people who cannot flee to elect a whole new coup, to elect a whole new government system that the United States installs. This is systematic dispossession of land and resources and autonomy and freedom.
Sema, I'm curious what you make of, there was like this image of these kind of tweets juxtaposed next to each other that showed Kamala Harris tweeting herself back in 2017 against Trump's border policies, saying we welcome immigrants here. And she had, and no, well, there it is. I think that actually might be my image. But you see in one of the images, she says, say it loud, say it clear, everyone is welcome here. And it's an image of her, I believe, outside the White House with other protesters, hashtag no ban, no wall. And then you see what she said, right? We showed that clip before, do not come here. What does this say about the Democratic Party, which she's a leader of?
Well, again, if this was Trump, if this was anyone else, there would have been an uproar, a protest, organizing. Instead, there is nothing. There is nothing but silence. And one of the things that I've seen the United States media do is continuously cover up for this administration and their failures, and always going back to this is Trump's fault for dismantling the immigration system, when actually he had something to do with it. But let's not forget that these policies existed before Trump. They predate Trump. They predate Obama. They actually predate somewhat Bush, but it's kind of in the cusp of the Clintons and the Bush era, where they intentionally destabilized. So this has been going on for at least 40 years in Mexico and South America, where the United States intentionally destabilizes those nations and those countries. So, this is just a continuation of that. It's a continuation of the constant takeover of the United States and their imperialism to take over countries and governments and resources that don't belong to them. This is a continuation, regardless of what the party is. This is all about corporate takeover. And what I have seen with Kamala Harris is that she is going to these regions, and instead of centering the people that are suffering the most, instead of visiting the border and going to the detention centers and hearing the stories from the mothers and fathers and children that have been displaced, that have been separated from their families, or that have been deported, or the families that have not been reunited with their children, with their families, she instead centers Microsoft. She instead centers MasterCard as corporations that are going to go to South America, to Guatemala, to help families. That way they don't have to leave their country to come to the United States, set them up with bank accounts. Why is she centering corporations? Why is she centering these corporate interests? Because there's already been enough destabilization there that the only way to stop people from coming to this country is to embark them with debt, with a bunch of corporate debt where they cannot leave.
I mean, I think that's so crucial. I mean, the things that are mentioned, the things that aren't mentioned, it's possible I missed it, but I didn't see her mention one time in Guatemala that the government, of course, has, gone out of its way to basically give impunity to those who committed genocide against indigenous people in Guatemala. And here she is, standing with that government, standing with those leaders, saying, well, we're going to give you hundreds of millions of dollars and have these US corporations come in and act as if they're going to solve something for these people. I mean, it just is so, it's just so disgusting. I mean, I feel like I could pull so many negative words because it really is just, and it's never reported this way. In the context of the US media, it's always reported, oh, well, she just went and met with this president and they have XYZ program. And the broader context is never really given. And I feel like that's so much of the issue, Sema, is even now when, all these people are claiming to be, pro-immigrant in the White House and wherever, there's still so much dehumanization of the immigrant experience in the media and from politicians in the way this issue is addressed.
Yeah, I completely agree with that statement. And the United States media should do more to do investigative reporting and trace where the money is coming from and where it's going to, because we know that a lot of these governments are corrupt. To what extent, we don't know, but we also know that these government leaders were elected, selected, and installed by the United States. So there is definitely not enough reporting going on, and it's up to independent media to do this kind of reporting, publishing it, talking about it, exposing it, unpacking it so people can understand the depths of corruption, the depths of American imperialism and what it does to people like, my family or my friends that are, their family is from Guatemala, or my friends that are from Venezuela who cannot go back, who have no place to go if they were deported or even just put in a detention center. And what we need to also talk about is, what are the rights for undocumented immigrants? What are the rights for asylum seekers? That isn't talked about enough. It was talked about a lot during the Trump administration, but now there isn't enough going on to talk about it, expose it, and have these really workshops to let people know in very vulnerable communities what their rights are.
I mean, it really is just well, I guess I always say it's unbelievable. I guess it's not unbelievable, sadly. I mean, it should be unbelievable, but it's par for the course in terms of how this issue is laid out. Rania, go ahead.
Well, it's just frustrating to watch because, and I'm sorry I keep bringing it back to this, but it just seems like this is a campaign slogan and nothing more. It's something to throw out, like you mentioned, as like an identity marker. I'm the child of immigrants, right? As a way to tell people to vote for you and to try to like use as a qualification for office or something. But then as soon as these people get elected, it's all out the window. And like you said, I mean, when is the last time anyone said anything about immigrants? I mean, I believe it's the last time we had you on the show, Sema, we talked about this because it was when Biden had just started his presidency. And for about a week, as happens every year, there was this influx of people coming across the border and of children being apprehended. And so that was a news story for a minute. But it just seems like, the media likes this kind of, victim porn or suffering, like migrant suffering sort of porn or whatever you want to call it, for clicks, without ever looking at, the root causes, as Kamala Harris would say. And then we have this political party that, doesn't openly hate immigrants. And a lot of them are the children of immigrants, as they like to remind us, but it's just a campaign slogan. And that's it. Like, well, how do we deal with that? How do we challenge that?
Well, we have to also remember during the 2020 presidential campaign when a person in the crowd asked Joe Biden about his immigration record, and he told him, go vote for Trump. Like that we should have known from then on that it was going to be a continual dismissal of undocumented immigrants and continual exploitation of undocumented immigrants in this country. We also have to remember that when people use the identity politics of I'm a child of immigrants, well, honestly, I am a child of immigrants, and we worked in the labor fields. My parents worked in the labor fields. It's what have you done for immigrants, for undocumented or documented DACA recipients? What have you done to facilitate the pathway to citizenship? What have you done to advocate for undocumented immigrants? What have you done? And you continuously come up with the same response, not a motherfucking thing, not a damn thing. And that has always been the case. Unless it has to do with exploitation, they really haven't done anything, because we know that the only person that ever did advocate for undocumented immigrants here in Immokalee, Florida, was and has always been Bernie Sanders. Senator Bernie Sanders has always advocated for undocumented immigrants, and coming out here to Immokalee, Florida, and talking with the laborers who are working the tomato fields, he was advocating for them and saying that people who come to this country should not only have a visa to work in the fields, they have a right to get a higher education. They have a right to seek employment that doesn't subject them to exploitation and starvation wages. Like, he has always been constant about that. And comparing that to a Biden or Kamala Harris, they don't even come close ever to advocating for undocumented immigrants. As a matter of fact, we've seen people like Kamala Harris even speaking of a mother and truancy, and how, she was just cackling at the fact that she wrote a letter, or she was going to send the mother to jail. I mean, she does this, and she has done this to people in this own country. What do you think she's going to do to people who are not from this country and don't have the same kind of protections, who are more vulnerable? That should have been a red flag from a long time ago, from the get-go.
That's an excellent point. I mean, so much has happened that I actually forgot about that time. I mean, I forgot Kamala Harris was the top cop, right? She called herself a cop, top cop.
Sure was.
She
Took a photo with a bunch of Border
and was
Patrol
proud
agents
of it.
right there on the border. Well, Sema Hernandez, really appreciate you joining us, giving us your thoughts on this. Sadly, this might be an ongoing saga with the people we're talking about, the Biden administration. Be happy to keep talking to you as this continues to unfold. But thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate you.
Thank you for the invitation. If I could just say one more thing, that when families are separated or expelled or rejected at the border, the people who pick up the pieces and help the people that have been rejected by either the past administration, this administration, are always the people that I know and care about at the border, that are making makeshift encampments. And they need help, and they need resources to help those people that are the most vulnerable. I can send you a link later, and we can post it and help to get resources to those specific organizations on the border. I've been there myself. I have helped to send supplies at the border, and I have been at certain encampments that I cannot disclose the location of, because of just, exposing vulnerable people already is something that I'm not willing to do. But they need help, and they're doing the work, because this administration, just like the past administration, continuously are causing more harm.
Yeah, well, no, please do. I think it's important we uplift that work, and important we recognize that there are a lot of people who are working on these issues. It's just not the people who allegedly have authority and power. Sema Hernandez, human rights advocate, activist, former U.S. Senate candidate, a daughter of immigrants who is not obviously using it in the sense of Kamala Harris. Thank you so much for joining us here.
Right.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, Rania, I mean, what do we expect from some of these people? I don't know, but it really is still, I think it is disappointing. I think it's fair to say disappointing, even if you didn't expect that much from them, to have that level of just hypocrisy.
It's Juan.
Oh my God.
That is some good stuff. That was good, Juan.
Yes.
Juan in the booth.
Brought it back.
Cancel.
I'm in full circle.
Cancel. I don't know if I can answer your question, because I've been canceled by the lower third.
No, please, you can. It was really a feeling, not a question.
Okay, well, but actually, I needed that laugh, because this issue is just like it actually angers me. Like, I feel angry, because there's just the sheer audacity to use this so brazenly as a campaign slogan. I mean, Kamala Harris became popular because of those like performances of hers in the Senate, right? Speaking out against Trump. I didn't know who she was before that. She was just another senator. That really put her on the map. And so many of these Democratic politicians got put on the map with these empty performances against Trump policies that they now support and really always supported. They were lying. She lied. Jesus Christ. I didn't even
notice a lot of fun over there. But this is what happens, Rania, when I'm not there in the studio. It just gets silly. It gets very silly.
I think it's fun. I think it's fun. It's good to have this element in the show where I just don't like the fact that I got canceled. I mean, can we cancel someone else?
If anyone is going to get canceled on this show, I feel like you are the number one. I'm much more circumspect. What do you want me to say?
Wow. That's a lot to say. I mean, do people who are watching, do you think that I should be canceled?
No, I'm not saying that you should be canceled. I'm not saying you should be canceled. I support you. I'm just saying if I went to Vegas and put a prop bet on which one of us was more likely to be canceled.
Well, I guess I'm the more impulsive one.
Well, you said it.
How do you cancel me twice? How do I get canceled? I'm going to Barry Weiss. That's it. I'm going to Barry Weiss. I have to speak out against this.
Tell her how you lost your hairdresser.
Cancel culture.
Were you triggered by a free parking sign?
Yes. I was canceled by a free parking sign.
One of the best things I've ever seen. Free parking sign.
I'd like to cancel Kamala Harris because of her. Like,
it really is though unbelievable. I mean, to say that you're like all about the root causes and then go to Guatemala and be like, but by the way, don't ever come and we're going to give $100 million to a corrupt right-wing government. That is the reason why you're leaving. It just says everything. I mean, Honduras, El Salvador. All these countries are, El Salvador and the U.S. are a little bit on the outs, but deep in the embrace of the United States. And there's no context, no political context given. But while we're talking about Latin America, let's shift to maybe some more positive news. About positive news in Peru, also in Mexico, I would say, although the way it's been reported is a little bit different. But of course, in Peru, it's just about over. Pedro Castillo, it seems, about to become the president there. We are very happy to be joined as we continue the show by Daniela Ramos, who is a journalist with Argmedios, and also Denis Rogatyuk, also a journalist who have been there accompanying the election process in Peru. And also Denis was there in Mexico, where there were also elections over the weekend, where it flew a little bit under the radar, but also a major issue. But Peru, of course, has been front of mind in the world media as well. So very happy to have them alongside with us. I'm sure they'll be with us soon. Perfect here. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you so much, Eugene. Thank you so much, Rania. Finally, I get a chance to be here.
We're very, very happy to have you.
We're happy to have you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Well, Daniela, I'll start with you. I guess it seems that Pedro Castillo is almost certainly going to win. What does this? What did we see in Peru? What does it mean, and what can we expect in the coming days?
Well, I think we can already say he's the new president of Peru. Almost an hour ago, the electoral authorities confirmed that they already have processed 100% of the election reports, the election sheet. And Pedro Castillo is leading with almost 70,000 votes. So I think we can already say he's the president, because two other things happened today that are quite important. One of them is that Keiko Fujimori, which is the opposite candidate, is already trying to present some kind of annulment over some of these electoral reports, but she has absolutely no proofs. They are already, saying, even the media here in Peru, which has been campaigning for her for the past week, is already saying this has no value, And the other thing is that a prosecutor here today asked her for preventive jail for Keiko Fujimori because she is already has some accusations about money laundry during her campaign. She has campaigned before over 2011, 2016. So she has been seen with part of his team is a witness in that case. So a prosecutor today say, okay, this cannot happen. So I think what Keiko is trying to do with this kind of announcements and trying to reject the final result, she is trying to avoid jail, basically. So that is what is also happening here. We are defining the new president of Peru, but this is also what happens because for everyone who's not exactly following what is happening in Peru, Pedro Castillo represents a big change in this country. And Keiko Fujimori is someone already quite known here because his father already governed this country. And he has done a lot of things that are still very hurtful for people in Peru. So what happening here is very important for people in Peru. They are already mobilizing. They have been mobilizing all over the country for the past 4 days, expecting the results. And I think it's very important for Latin America because it shows a new horizon. So I think this is something, worthy to witness. I feel quite privileged to be here. I have been here for the past 4 weeks. So I think we are ahead of something quite important in our region.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, Denis, you were also there in Peru, so I'll pose the same question to you. I'm curious what meaning you're drawing from the result we've seen in the presidential election.
Well, I got a chance to be in Peru for us also in the last couple of weeks, witness the electoral campaign in Lima and also in Cusco. And it was actually quite interesting that because the final results shows this, not just depolarization, but also this enormous amount of support that Pedro Castillo has in the deep Peru, in the interior, in the center, in the north, in the south. In Cusco, Pedro Castillo won with 86% of the vote. This is not something usual. This is not what usually happens, either in Peru or in many of the other elections in Latin America. On the other hand, in Lima, which is the biggest, electoral district, so to speak, of Peru, Keiko Fujimori won 2/3 of the vote. Lima also represents, I think, almost 30% of the population. But it was very interesting to actually to witness both how different the two regions were, and also to witness the campaign against Keiko, and also against the campaign against Keiko, the campaign in favor of Keiko, and also the various marches of Pedro Castillo. Now, the sense which I got at several of these marches, at the march against Keiko, which was just a few days before the election, is that her image and also her past and the past of her father is still remembered with a lot of animosity, with a lot of hatred for everything that they did to the country back in the 1990s. We have to remember that Alberto Fujimori was responsible for the forced sterilization of 250,000 indigenous women. He was responsible for forced disappearances of trade union activists, of social activists. He was responsible for the privatization and sell-off of so many of the state-controlled industries. Their utilities as well, such as water and some natural resources of Peru, especially mining. There and of course he became very well known for pocketing a huge part of the sum of these privatizations, which is mainly the reason why he's currently in jail. And the way elections turning out, he'll soon be joined by his daughter. Now, this is what I witnessed in the anti-Keiko marches, and also to a big extent in the marches in favor of Peru. Now, the pro-Caico marches were another story entirely. So these marches were mostly really focused on creating fear-mongering, on creating this kind of a atmosphere of not just fear, but also atmosphere of this rejection of Peru as being a communist candidate, someone who turned Peru into another Venezuela, as a candidate who supposedly has links with the Shining Path terrorist group, which of course he doesn't. They never actually spoke of any of the proposals which they would implement. All it was just it was literally it was just it was turned into an electoral platform against left and against and against communism. And it should be noted. Although Peru Libre or Free Peru, it's a revolutionary party. It's a Marxist-Leninist party. It is a party which practices democratic centralism as well, and of course it has policies of nationalizing key industries and resources. But Pedro Castillo himself was not a member of the party until very recently. So he himself is not a communist. In fact, he said that during his rallies. He said intervention into Venezuela must end, but the model of Venezuela has nothing to do with what they want, what they wish to accomplish there in Peru. So it was a campaign. So Caico's campaign was, I'd say, really it did not lack it. It wasn't for the lack of money, but it was definitely for the lack of innovation. And also all across Lima, wherever I went, all around there were these huge announcements, billboards saying either no to communism, yes to democracy, and all kinds of. Plus, it's all around the city. It seemed so desperate that I just felt like this is I've seen this many times in Argentina, in Ecuador, in Mexico, all the elections, but Peru was on another level entirely, but it did not succeed. Yes. Because people
I think that's such an important point, that it did not succeed, and that despite the fact, and the international media, of course, piling on with the maximum amount of distortions as they could. Well, Daniela, let me also ask you this piece, and to speak to maybe some of the points of the change that could be represented. The slogan, I guess, generally of Castillo's campaign: no poor people in a rich country. What are some of the things that you have seen people embrace? What are the issues that Castillo was promoting that seem the most important to those who are supporting him?
Well, as you were talking before, what Castillo represents is what many people in this country have been denied for a long time. They feel like Castillo is one of them. Many people talk to many of the women in the popular neighborhoods, and they told he looks like us, and that's definitely something that is very interesting about him, because that is what makes him different from another previous candidates. So what he's represented is these people that has always been denied over Peru, people from the provinces, poor people. So as you were talking before, it also provokes a lot of rejection from part of Peruvian people, especially here, people in Lima. But what he is proposing along Peru Libre, as our colleague said, is a party, a previous party. He represents Peru Libre, but it's kind of an association. He's a teacher. He actually led a strike 4 years ago. So he's also a peasant, a teacher. That is what he represents. He has some experience as a rondero, which are kind of peasant patrols over here. Is an important organization that has a lot of history. That is what he represents. And when it comes to proposals, I would say that it takes especially to recover some important rights over here. We're talking about health, We're talking about education. And his main proposal is reforming the constitution, because the constitutions Peruvians have over here was approved under Alberto Fujimori's government. So they need to recover some of the rights that were taken off. So they are saying, okay, we are a rich country, but people are quite poor. So what we need is, first of all, make this big constitutional assembly so we can discuss among different people, not only the political class, we're talking about peasants, students, social movements. They all need to take part of this kind of refundation of Peru. So we have to have a new constitution. That's what they say. That's what they are proposing. And so that people can take part of it, because I think it will be very important for the future of Peru, that people that defends the government. On the other side, you have all the powerful people of the country. You have the power of the big media, the power of economics, the power of people that have been in politics for quite a long time. So he needs people to get involved. And probably this constitutional assembly, which is the main proposal, will be the most important policy to quickly take in the government. So this is one of the main proposals. He's also talking about health, because here the pandemic has been quite rough, especially last year. So one of the things he said, okay, we need vaccines. We need this vaccine soon. We don't want any other Peruvian to die because of lack of oxygen, because it had happened over here. So he's talking about health. He's talking about education. So he's mainly talking about rights. And I think that what probably would also be part of this government is some kind of cultural battle, because as you were talking earlier, there is a lot of xenophobia, a lot of racism, a lot of classism that is, part of the Peruvian society, and he's, breaking all of it. It's like this is quite a big challenge, because he will need the support of the people. He already has a big support from the people, but he also needs to organize this support, especially in different cities like Lima, where there is a lack of support that is much bigger all around the country. So I think it will be quite a challenge to make this agenda, that it can be, approved.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, let me ask you this too quickly as a follow-up, and then I want to use that as a segue. And you mentioned this earlier, Daniela, the regional impact of this and what we're seeing with the sort of broader move in Latin America. Obviously, Bolivia, Chile, all these other places. Where are you placing this in terms of the moment we're in for Latin American politics?
Well, we are always talking about this new wave. We are trying always to anticipate a new wave. Oh, this is the new wave of progress, or now the right is advancing. I think we need to take it, slow. We need to accomplish this process, listening, especially what is happening in other countries that are not ours. Because we are a region, we totally have like a common living, a common travels even, but we need to watch closely and be patient what happens in other countries. I think this is a big lesson for everyone in Latin America, because these are times of polarization, I will say, over the region. The leaders and the parties and the movements that are kind of emerging are the ones that are saying, the most confrontational, that confront, that have, like this direct speech. So I think what happens here in Peru is representative of that. These are times of polarization in the region, but he's not the classical left we know. I think what Peru Libre and Pedro Castillo are proposing are quite different. They even talk to the people in a different way. So I think even left movements all around the region don't exactly know what happens here. It's like this is quite new for everyone. So I think we will have to take a close look to what happens here in Peru. And I think there are a lot of important persons, because something that happens over here too is that, you know, this is a conservative social space, you know, these are, so it's a conservative society, I would say. But there is also a common ground to advance in a lot of social rights and to have another kind of discussions also. But we have to be, like, as I said, very patient, and people must get involved. So I think it will be also something quite new for left movements all over the region that are trying to understand what happens here. A few months ago, many people outside Peru didn't even know what Peru Libre was, who Pedro Castillo was. No, and now we are all over here. We are talking about it. So I think we have to take a close look.
Well, Dennis, I want to ask you a similar question about the region, especially because you were there in Mexico, where there were also big elections, local elections and regional elections. But, you know, the first, in many ways, big test, you know, for AMLO and the fourth transformation. I mean, maybe talk a little bit about Mexico. I mean, I'm certainly very, very curious to hear your reflections on the actual process, but also sort of, you know, where this all fits this past weekend, what it's shown us in terms of the moment in the region.
Well, first of all, I love what Daniela mentioned in the regarding what she thought, what the ordinary people thought of Pedro Castillo, that he looks like us, because that is exactly the same phrase that was said by the people who first elected Evo Morales in Bolivia, the people who first elected Hugo Chavez in Venezuela, as well as Korea and Ecuador. So the first time that you actually had someone who represents the ethnic majority of that country, especially in the case of Evo Morales. So this is, I think that's actually the best summary of Pedro Castillo's campaign. That he actually looked and sounded like the vast majority of the population, sort of the forgotten majority of Peru. To do a bit of analysis of what it means regionally, and actually what does it actually mean overall. Here I really like to use the analysis used by Adolfo Garcia Linera in one of his books. He talks about what he calls the plebeian moment, or the plebeian rebellion. So something is similar to what happened in the elections in Bolivia. The October Revolution in Russia is another example. But what he means by that is kind of that moment when a candidate organization that emerged that is able to galvanize the support of the vast majority, or at least the majority of the population, galvanize the support of the organized working class by putting forward the most popular, a list of the most popular demands, and really at the same time incorporating the mentality and the emotional state of these of the masses. That is exactly what Pedro Castillo achieved with this victory in Peru. That in the popular demands in the economic program, they incorporated the popular demands for the renationalization of the of resources, for a new constitution, justice for the victims of the Fujimori dictatorship, cleaning out the Peruvian state from corruption. All these incredibly popular demands. But on the other hand, we also must acknowledge that Pedro Castillo is in some ways the conservative leader, and he showed that as well during a lot of the meetings and rallies. But this is the mentality of the Peruvian working class. That it is economically very progressive, very left wing, but in many ways still socially conservative. I would say that what it means overall. Again, going back to Alvaro Garcia Linera, he mentioned in many of his writings, and what he mentioned to me is that we need to stop looking at these new election of new left-wing governments as waves, as you call it. Rather, Rather, we need to imagine these as sort of like a circular motion. So we've got because neoliberalism, the neoliberal governments that have emerged in the last few years, Brazil, Chile, Colombia, Mexico before AMLO, Argentina before Alberto Fernandez, have failed miserably in providing a credible alternative to socialism. Failed in providing the concrete alternative to let's say the various sort of strains of the pink tide. So the victory, I think what the victory in Peru actually points to kind of a sea change, which is kind of happening in the countries which haven't yet quite experienced the pink tide. So here I'm talking about Chile, Peru, and Colombia. Mexico thankfully broke through of AMLO, of course, in 2018. But the victory of Castillo signals that it would also be possible for the left to achieve a similar victory in the elections in November, where the key candidates of the left, Daniel Jadwe, who is from the Communist Party, is now leading in the polls. For the left to achieve a victory in the Colombian presidential elections, where Gustavo Petro, another very prominent left-wing individual, is also currently the most popular politician in the country as well. And to finish off, to briefly speak about the elections process in Mexico. This is kind of the equivalent of the midterms of the United States, as we've had the elections to the federal Congress, elections to 15 governors, and elections all throughout the cities, capitals, and also state parliaments here in Mexico. I'll quickly go through how did the left actually go in each one of those levels. I'll start with the kind of a mixed news, so to speak. In the federal Congress, the coalition representing the fourth transformation, the coalition supporting the presidency of Andrés Manuel López Obrador, they scored a majority. It seems that they will get between 285 and 290 federal deputies out of 500, which that gives them an absolute majority to continue on with their policies. Now that is a slight setback to the number of seats that they had previously. So they had just over 300 there, but it would still mean that Manuel Lopez would have a stable majority there in Congress. Now the real big victory for AMLO was, of course, the governorship elections, because Morena together with its allies won 12 out of 15 governorships, and in five of these were won by women as well, which is a record, a historic record for Mexico as well, which is really quite phenomenal. And also Morena and its allies won the electoral races in a great number. I think more than half of the capital cities of Mexico. The only other major setback that AMLO suffered is actually in the city of Mexico. Because we have to remember that the city of Mexico is sort of like governs itself like a region as well, but also has a local council, so as local mayoralties, and it is a city which, on a local and regional level, has always belonged to the left wing in the last 30-40 years. It has, I believe, that it's actually never had a properly right wing mayor. It's had say liberal or slightly neoliberal candidates, but never an actual right wing administration. And here we saw Morena and its allies actually lose the majority of the mayoralties, lose the majority of the local councils, especially in the western part of the city, which is where some of these areas are a bit richer, but there were also some of the popular areas, such as Tlalpan in the south or Cuauhtémoc in the north. of the city, which did come as a bit of a shock to Morena here in Mexico City. So it's really made them kind of not just reevaluate the strategy and the tactics and language, but also begin to understand that although Andrés Manuel López Obrador remains incredibly popular, so he has a popularity of between 55 and 70%, depends on which poll you go to, which is incredible considering the year that he's had, and this constant media avalanche against him and against his administration. Yet Morena, with the results that it achieved in City of Mexico, the results that it achieved in Congress, showed that it as a party, just as a party, has the support of approximately 40% of the population. So this vacuum of support, this between the president and the left-wing party, it will certainly be something that's it will certainly represent a challenge for the investments of the fourth transformation here. And just finish up, and this is not say exclusive to Mexico, because we have to remember that the vast majority of left-wing governments or left-wing leaders in Latin America have had to face the same problem, whether it was Chavez, Correa, Evo, the Kirchners, and something that we'll face, Pedro Castillo will also face, is this challenge of having a popular presidency, having a popular leader in charge, but then at the same time trying to build a popular, well-structured party that would also be able to carry on the work, even if the leader is no longer in the executive post. So in case of Mexico, this is something that's I think this is what the leaders of Morena will need to focus on.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, I appreciate you both being willing to join us here on the show. I mean, there's obviously a lot to watch for in Latin America, honestly, in the rest of this year. Certainly, I would say good results, more or less net positive in both countries. But Daniela Ramos, Denis Rogatyuk, both journalists, thank you for joining us here on the Freedom Side.
Thank you so
much. See you.
No, thank you. Absolutely. The pleasure was all ours. Rania, how are you feeling?
I'm feeling good about Peru.
Okay, I'm just checking in on you. I know that you're 7 hours ahead. So,
yeah. It's definitely the middle of the night for me, but I'm hanging in there. I got my coffee.
Excellent. Good. Well, yeah. No, I mean, it's certainly interesting to see what happened there in Peru, of course. And I mean, what could happen in Chile in the end of this year. You could have a communist as the president of Chile and a radical left as the president of Peru, which if you told me to bet on that 2 years ago, I would have told you were crazy if that would have happened. So, I mean, it does show that history is very unpredictable. And I think that a lot of times the perception is always that, things are going to always stay the way they are, especially when the powerful forces are just that, right? They're powerful. They control the media. They control the money. They control the jobs. They have the international connections. But things can change, and they can change quicker than people think. I mean, most people had never heard of Pedro Castillo, as Daniela said, even people in Peru when he won the election. So an important lesson, I think, for anyone around the world. And, we can say that. We said that 2 weeks ago, rather, about Palestine, about how 2 months ago, no one would have expected that there was going to be, this mass uprising across the whole Palestinian territory. So I always find that to be an interesting and a notable factor about some of these countries that maybe aren't as much in the news, you don't as much expect when they have these wins, because I think it is really indicative of, what can happen quickly, but when people are organized and determined. I mean, that's what it really comes down to.
100%.
Well,
and speaking of being organized and determined, there
please.
is another group of people that's very organized and determined. This is a good way to segue into what we're going to talk about next. There is a group of people that are organized and determined to use any and all opportunities to push a Cold War agenda. Do you want to go ahead and bring in this next little bit that we're going to be discussing?
Oh, the lab leak theory.
Lab leak.
I don't even really know what to call it. You know what I'm saying? People, it's called a hypothesis, I think, on Vox. Some are calling it a lab leak theory. Some are claiming it's not a theory, but it's actually what happened. It's honestly miraculous to see how quickly, too, the consensus, not even the consensus, obviously the consensus in this hasn't really changed, but the number of people excuse me, I mean, this was basically only Republicans who were talking about this in a big way like a month and a half ago. But then Joe Biden comes out and says, well, I'm going to ask the U.S. intelligence agencies to look into this. And then, you know, basically everybody on the liberal side as well then starts jumping in and acting like, oh, well, and even people who had previously said, oh, well, there's no chance there was a lab leak are like, well, maybe we were too dismissive. Maybe it really did happen. Maybe it is more plausible than we thought. And it was just amazing for me to see, Rania, and this is a YouGov poll that spoke to that. It's like 58% of people, I think, all told, believe that that a laboratory in China was the origin of COVID-19. And I think, you know, a few months back, it was like 42%. And so it just almost overnight turns into this whole other issue. And it's just amazing to also see how narratives are formed like that. Like when it was viewed as like a Trump thing, then, you know, the liberal media was just totally out there. But then when it's like co-signed by Biden, then even though the actual evidence and information has basically not changed on that issue since Trump started raising it like 10 seconds into the COVID-19 pandemic, but nevertheless, the perception and the way people talk about it has changed just purely on that partisan basis. So, I mean, I want to get to like the leak itself, but I mean, I did want to start, Rania, with just that kind of framing of how the public opinion changed so quickly and how partisan, you know, that process really was.
Right. So the lab leak theory was considered this big conspiracy because Trump pushed it out there, as well as certain people in his administration, trying to, of course, deflect blame from the U.S. for the horrible botched response that led to one of the worst COVID outbreaks in the world, to try to blame that on China and also use it to ratchet up, you know, the Cold War. And you know, I think what Biden did is he gave liberals permission to embrace this, what they formerly viewed as a conspiracy theory. And you know, I don't think either of us are in a position to really say where COVID originated from because we're not scientists. But
I mean,
the
no
majority
one is,
of
really.
scientists,
Anyway, we'll get to that.
Right, but then no one is. But most scientists at this point believe that, of course, anything is possible. No one can definitively say it did not leak from a lab, but nobody can say it did because we still don't know what the origin was. However, most scientists still believe the origin of it to be natural and aren't quite sure where or how. I mean, we also know, you know, what's funny about this is all of the facts have gone out the window about the fact that this may not have even initially started in Wuhan. We now know that there are other parts of the world where wastewater samples have shown that there were clusters of COVID in parts of Europe. As you know, in December, the same time that we saw clusters emerge in Wuhan. Wuhan was just the first place that had one of the bigger outbreaks. But one note of this that I want to make is, well, I'm not going to sit here and say I can tell you where this, you know, originated. What I can say is that there is a concerted effort by people who work at weapons industry funded think tanks to push this narrative. You know, the Hudson Institute is one of these think tanks. The Hudson Institute is like a neoconservative think tank. It's the new home of former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Wow, geez,
and it's funded by weapons industries, by various governments, and by various corporations. And, you know, the Hudson Institute has a fellow named David Asher, who in the first week of June, I mean, they were bragging that he was this Hudson Institute fellow who has worked inside the US government in various national security capacities, was cited in 6 different outlets on the lab leak theory in the first week of June. This isn't a scientist, right? This is somebody with an agenda. Okay. And then, you know, then you have, I mean, a family member of mine sent in a group chat this article in the Washington Post. It was an op-ed written by this guy, Mark Thiessen, former Bush speechwriter, now a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, who many people might recognize because it was literally where the Iraq War was planned, the terrible strategy behind it. So this guy who works at this very neoconservative, also weapons industry funded think tank, wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post on why the lab leak theory must be true. And of course, your average person who's not, you know, educated in the different think tanks of DC and who's who, is going to pass this around thinking the Washington Post is buying into this theory and it's okay to buy into it now. And then you have this Vanity Fair piece, right? It's like this 12,000 word investigative piece into some of the aspects of how there was these emails that were leaked, how the U.S., how people in the U.S. government did think it might have leaked from a lab. But that's beside the point. This piece also quoted and cited all of these think tank people that work at these weapons industry funded think tanks. Again, not scientists, people, including David Asher from the Hudson Institute, who I mentioned. And what was funny to me is this Vanity Fair piece opened up by citing this data analyst, right? Not a scientist, not a researcher, not like somebody who works in a lab or is a doctor or has like a PhD in the origin of viruses, but this data researcher who has Asperger's and became obsessed with finding patterns. And so he started some group of people who found patterns that this could have leaked from a lab. I mean, this is what's being cited in mainstream media, and this is what Americans are being bombarded with. And that's why their opinions have shifted on this. I mean, it really is a concerted propaganda effort. And again, I'm not trying to suggest that I know where this came from. Like, literally anything's plausible, but people need to recognize. But
it's not equally plausible, and that's actually what's
right. It's not
important.
equally plausible. It's unlikely.
It's not
actually the most
plausible,
unlikely.
But the way it's being presented by the media is that you have two co-equal stories. Because I mean, it's also true that the information that's needed to confirm that it's a quote unquote natural origin zoonotic, some of that information is missing, and some of it is very relevant to the point you just made, Rania, about where it really is from. But it's sort of like, something can be, you can have two things that could have happened, but have a lot of evidence that one thing probably happened and the other thing maybe happened. Like if I'm looking in the other direction right now and someone throws a baseball through my window and I look back out there and I see someone standing there with a baseball glove with their hands on their head like that and looking like, oh my God, I can't believe I broke a window. Now, I didn't see them throw the baseball and break the window. Is there potentially another explanation? Yes, there's potentially another explanation. But is that somehow equally as likely as the thing that's right there in the face? And I think that, to me, is the challenge of the way the media is reporting this and the way they've sort of re-reported it. Like, I thought actually Vox had a very good explainer on the issue, but even the way they described their own stance, they were like, well, we previously had totally dismissed this, but now we're kind of not totally dismissing it, even though all of the evidence in the article basically was laying out how the only significant body of evidence that exists is around the issue of the origin. But I mean, I think it is important to talk about what we do actually know and what is relevant about this. And, I said this on our podcast that I do every day, the Punch Out, a couple weeks back. Maybe the most important thing to me about the entire lab leak thesis is that to some degree, it is in fact not relevant, because the issue that it's being brought up to say is to basically blame China for the fact that, hundreds of thousands of people in the United States died of COVID-19. And honestly, no matter where it came from, the blame is squarely on the United States government. I mean, on January 31st is when it was declared a global health emergency. And that was actually, I think, about 11 days after the lockdown had happened in China. In early January, the United States was already screening for people with COVID in the West Coast. The first lockdowns didn't come until the end of March, basically, just a couple days or mid-March, a couple days before the first lockdown in New York, because it's not just Trump. Andrew Cuomo was telling people you shouldn't have excess of anxiety. And
he said, don't worry. He said, don't worry. He's like, you could touch the train poles. He's like, you don't really have to wear a mask.
Exactly. And so it was so clear they chose to do nothing. Even when it was clearly bad and the first, lockdown started coming in, they still basically didn't do anything. So I think what's most important is, regardless of the origin, the reason hundreds of thousands of people died in the United States is the complete and total abject failure of the U.S. government to prepare, and the previous failure of multiple U.S. governments to have no real public health infrastructure in this country. I mean, we all can remember how many people they were saying, well, if you have a comorbidity, you have such a higher rate of dying. Well, why do people have so many comorbidities? I mean, we have to look to all of those problems for why there's no resiliency. And so regardless of the origin, it's the current contemporary US government and the historical lack of action on the issue of healthcare that eliminated resiliency for why hundreds of thousands of people are dead. So that, I think, is the most important thing to say there. But what I will say about the issue of the so-called lab leak, because it is important to understand what's going on, because part of it is that people have no idea what's really happening, is the allegation, for people to understand. In Wuhan, there's something called the Wuhan Institute for Virology. They study viruses there. Now, at that institute, they do study coronaviruses that are linked to bats. There is no evidence that there was COVID-19 or anything like COVID-19 in the Wuhan Institute for Virology. Now, in March, a scientist from the Wuhan Institute for Virology said herself, and this is, I think, important. She said, my first thought was, is it possible this came from our lab? Is it possible something leaked? Like, she was concerned. So she went back and looked. She had the researchers check all the genomes of all the different pieces, and there was nothing that seemed to even match with COVID-19, and none of the other things that they are working with, bat coronaviruses, have leaked in the area. So it's not as if even people in China were dismissing this. They were thinking, wow, we better check and see what's going on. So just right there, you have some questions. But the allegation that comes from people who say it's a lab leak is basically this, that inside of this lab, that they were, well, two things. It's really two things. That one of two things happened in this lab. A, somebody who was researching other bat coronaviruses was somehow infected with COVID-19, probably by being bitten by a bat or something like that, and then somehow they became the vector. But that is sort of the most benign version of the lab leak, and we can come back to that. But the one that's really being pushed,
that sounds like a superhero origin story.
What's that?
That sounds like a superhero origin story. That's like,
it is kind of in that way.
working in a virus.
The one that's being pushed by the right wing is that they were doing research on coronaviruses, that they created COVID-19, and that then there was either accidentally or on purpose, it was leaked out of this lab, and then that's where the Wuhan outbreak came from. Now, there are a lot of problems with that on multiple levels. The first, of course, that there's no evidence that there's ever COVID-19 there. There's another issue about whether or not they were actually experimenting on coronaviruses in a way that could have made a new virus. Those sorts of things do happen. And then there would be a question, of course, of why, and initially in Wuhan, there were two different strains, essentially, more or less, of COVID-19 that were in existence. But if one thing leaked from a lab, how did the second one happen? So there are a lot of questions about how even any of that could have gone forward, or what could have happened, or where it went. But there has been a lot of clouds around it for a lot of reasons, some of which you already mentioned, Rania, but some of the researchers and some of the research on coronaviruses that was happening in the Wuhan Institute for Virology is linked to companies, one of which is run by this guy, Peter Daszak, who's become very famous, linked to companies that do what is known as gain-of-function research, that they research into viruses and they try to weaponize them, turn them into well, they don't say that that's what they're doing, but that's basically what they're doing.
No, what do they say they're doing? They say that they're just trying to see how bad the virus can get, so they can prepare.
Yeah, they're trying to make super
virus. If the virus gets bad,
they can fight
it's like
the
they have
super
this
virus.
whole weird euphemism. Yeah.
Yeah. And it was banned for about 4 years in the United States because there was a big controversy over the bird flu and sort of the weaponizing of the bird flu. So it's only been recent that you've been able to do this. But anyway, that this company that's connected to the Wuhan Institute for Virology, that does do this research, that is funded by the U.S. military-industrial complex, and is doing gain-of-function research in the United States in Fort Meade, which is where the U.S. government does all of their weapons research on biological weapons, that raises the question about whether or not there was something fishy going on there. So what the right wing is basically saying is that there was probably some collusion between the Chinese Communist Party and these, U.S. companies, because in their mind, the Chinese Communist Party and like subsets of the U.S. government and the Democratic Party
Right.
and some of the Republicans in their mind are all working together to like destroy the world or whatever. Then there are other people who have raised the issue of like whether or not they're maybe trying to frame China because they, want to blame it on them, and that these people knew what was going on because they were working there, blah, 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 and they thought they could frame them. So you can see that there's a million different threads there, most of which have no real evidence connected to them. They require a lot of leaps of logic to really prove them that they're there. But in the most basic sense, it's like plausible that, yes, it is true that labs often do leak. Yes, it is true that in the Wuhan Institute for Virology, they were doing research on other types of bat-linked coronavirus. Yes, it is true that some of the people involved in that research do gain-of-function research on other viruses. That is certainly suspect, and that has a lot of problematic elements to it in terms of its funding and just the ethics of this kind of research and what is done. But there's also no real evidence that it leaked from the lab, that it was ever in the lab, that Wuhan is even the very first place where the virus was. And so all these other questions raise so many different pieces. And so that's why I think the lab leak theory in and of itself, just doesn't stand. But to finish the point and just to close here, the issue of the natural origin is a very different issue. I mean, one, and this is why I think the way it's reported is ridiculous. One, the way most diseases like this come out of nowhere, like hundreds and hundreds of diseases, is they jump from one animal to humans or one animal to another animal to humans. It's happened hundreds of times. And it's one of the most noted things about virus biology, the ability to mutate and to change. So just right there at baseline, that should probably be considered more, legitimate, given that it happens all the time. Secondarily, there are actually many types of coronaviruses that are linked to bats, not just in China, but in Japan, in Thailand, all over Asia and different places like that. So the idea that, something that has happened hundreds and hundreds of times, maybe thousands of times over the history of humanity, maybe more than that, could happen again when it seems that the closest potential virus to it is all around the region, and there are thousands of opportunities for it to mutate and to jump to other animals and to jump to humans, is yet again just another point speaking to the fact that this is almost certainly or most likely to be more of a natural origin virus. So it's really, when you put the two pieces of information together, you have one that is based on sort of a just wild chain of theories that aren't really connected, that is plausible, but there's no real agency for it. Then you have another one that, yes, there's still a lot more information that needs to be known, including whether or not Wuhan was the center. And some of the research in China about this is casting doubt on that, right? I mean, they have argued, the Global Times and others, that it probably is not from China. So there are questions about that.
I mean, there's actual proof about that too, because in Italy, like the thing is that there's critiques on the mainstream media of like not doing more to like figure out if this lab leak theory is right. Yeah. But there's also so much that hasn't been done just because you could set the ball at China, right? Like they haven't, whether it happened in a market, whether it happened because of different animals being in proximities to each other, at the end of the day is in China. But in Italy, last year, and I think like around November, NPR came out with something, but also like doctors in Italy were talking about how as early as September 2019, they had blood samples of 101 people that had antibodies for COVID-19. As early as September 2019, September, right? That's before the cases.
Yeah, and it's not just in Italy that there were similar findings in other places. It's like, it's so obvious what's happening here. It's like you're being so logical with what you're saying, but the reason the logic isn't hitting is because there's an agenda behind this. It's a Cold War agenda. The US population is primed to dislike China and to blame China for things, right? And this is the perfect opportunity for that entire military-industrial complex of think tanks and former officials and all these people who want to ramp up the Cold War to jump on everything possible to try to ratchet up hatred for China, because you need America's population to be primed to hate China in order to justify the growing and bloated military budgets that are required to challenge China and to keep China at bay because of this big economic
that's why Biden is playing
threat that it presents to U.S. hegemony. Sorry, go ahead, Juan.
No, that's why Biden is playing footsies with, like, we'll investigate, our intelligence, we'll give them 90 days to come back. The reason why is because when things were happening in Palestine, when Biden made a statement with his wife, he mentioned the Uyghurs before he mentioned Israel or Palestine, because right now they're focused on China, That's what they're focused on. They're focused on China. Like,
and they're right to be. I mean, look, they're American empire, right? The big
You're about to get
imperialist
canceled
country
again.
of the world, the big
You're about to get canceled
superpower,
again, Rania.
is now has a challenge to this unipolar world, because China is this rising economy. It's supposed to overshadow the U.S. by like 2028, and the U.S. is terrified of that because it's an empire, it's an imperialist country, and it can't deal with a country as big and powerful as China being able to stand up to it. And that's exactly what's happening. So in order to prevent that outcome, which I actually don't think the U.S. can prevent, they have to do everything in their power to try to keep China down, to surround China with American military and naval assets. I think at this point, like 2/3 or something, some crazy number of like American naval assets are in the Asia Pacific. That's not by accident. We know for the last decade or more, the U.S. Pentagon has been writing these white papers warning about China, 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 China. In fact, you could even say that 9/11 sort of became this obstacle to the U.S. doing what it was always on the course to do, which is face China. And that's what this is all about now. And I think the COVID pandemic really accelerated that issue, because it really exposed America for the decaying neoliberal shithole that it's become. Excuse my language, but I mean
it's true.
It's just the truth. Look
It's
at how
true.
China was able to handle this pandemic, because it has a centralized government that actually prioritized public health over profit. And then look at how the U.S. handled it. It was a catastrophe. And I think that demonstrated to the world the difference between these two systems as well. And so China doesn't just pose an economic threat to the U.S. In many ways, it also poses an ideological threat to the U.S., because global South countries have watched China go from being a poor country to being a very well-off country with a growing middle class, and not under, it wasn't forced on China through neoliberalism and austerity. China was able to come out of being a developing country on its own with its own policies, and it presents an alternative. Whether you like that alternative or not is a different story, but it presents an alternative.
And the U.S.
to this
clearly doesn't like
rot
that
the U.S. has
alternative.
imposed on the rest of the third world.
Yeah.
And that is a huge challenge for America, just as like an image.
And then Biden said it. Biden said it when he gave his speech. He said, the rule of law, like the international rule of law. Like, and after that, we saw what happened in Colombia happen after his speech. We saw what happened in Palestine happen, right? But the critiques are very light. If any of the stuff that happened around the world in the last couple of weeks, which is crazy, there's only been a couple of weeks, had happened in China,
right?
Every administration,
Game over.
Yeah, everybody in the administration would have been speaking about it, right? They would have been talking about maybe even sending military, or the military option is not out of the realm. That would have been the conversation. But since it was people that they support, they turned a blind eye to it. And we can't let that chaos, that hype really like overtake it. Because the thing is that I hear people on a regular basis that are like working class people that should be more pissed off about the fact that Republicans and Democrats are not doing anything at all for them, talk about China, right? Because that's what we get spoon fed. That's what we get spoon fed.
Yeah.
So then when there's a war or when there's an issue, we have a person to blame. Right, they're prepping the masses up for whatever their next move is.
100%.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good point. Yeah, I mean it's obviously ridiculous on so many levels, and there's a lot of diseases that you never actually prove exactly 100% where they come from. So you have this issue where people can exploit that in order to promote these theories and to sort of connect things and bring them together. But yeah, I mean it really is just. To me, the biggest malpractice is the media. I mean, you can't just report it as if you have two co-equal stories when you don't have two co-equal stories. You have,
they weren't
like,
doing
on
that
one
until it was
hand,
convenient. They weren't doing it
right?
until it was
It's
convenient.
Exactly. They wait, and the fact that people are going back on what they said previously, that's the thing that upsets me. It's like, well, you already reported it. The facts didn't change, but because Biden is saying it, then now all of a sudden you're giving
it gives
it
them
more
ammunition.
credibility.
Which is why nobody trusts the media. Like, it's why nobody trusts the media, because they'll flip-flop based on partisan issues, on partisan loyalty all the time. And this is like a huge, this is a huge example of that. Like, literally overnight. It went from this is a crazy conspiracy to okay, well now Biden's saying it. So
but it's
right.
It's because Biden
maybe it's possible.
Yeah, Biden came back hard on the Asia pivot. Like you can there's a lot of criticisms that are out there, but like one that is real is that the administrations would do the same thing. They would try to follow. He's trying to continue the Obama administration. That Asia pivot was something that was being worked on during the Obama administration. Trump came and he was, doing a lot of nothing and like focusing all over the place. But they came back with their previous agenda. They're back to work, right? That's why all the things that like people fought for during the elections, people, that went out in the streets and people that did like voter registration, the issues that people were fighting for are not they're currently on the back burner because they're back to doing what really matters to them, right? They're back to the Asia pivot.
Which is protecting the rules-based international order.
Most
That's what's really important to them.
Euphemism for imperialism. But yeah, bottom line is, there really is no like lab leak theory. There's just a possibility that, maybe somehow, some way, but there's so many holes in it, versus
also
thousands of years of evolutionary theory and virology.
The Wuhan lab leak theory is like no more plausible than a U.S. lab leak theory. Like that's the other thing too, is like you could say it leaks from a U.S. lab and you'd have the same level of plausibility because they do study coronaviruses at these U.S. labs too. Like it's just
but there's also multiple
coronaviruses.
There's multiple coronaviruses, there's multiple things. To prove a lab leak, you would have to prove that a lab had COVID-19. And no one has proven that any lab anywhere in the world had COVID-19 in there. And the only real evidence that COVID-19 existed in nature prior to this happening is the relationship of really other similar viruses like SARS that came from bats. There's also MERS that came from camels. There's also certainly evidence of many coronaviruses in other bats all around the general region. So it sort of generally makes sense. So in order to make a lab leak theory, you'd have to prove that someone created COVID-19 in a lab by studying another coronavirus. And no one has offered any evidence in any way, shape, or form that really suggests that. People are offering evidence that implies that, but not that, or that does suggest that implies that, but that doesn't actually prove that or does not actually speak to that. And that's the thing about the China piece, is that you can kind of do that because people assume, well, China is nefarious, right?
Yeah,
that's what
China.
We hear. So maybe they did create it and they're just lying about it, and then somehow that it leaked out. So, if that's the sort of level of proof you want to go with, well, then okay. But in terms of elevating this to like a geopolitical issue, that seems totally absurd. And of course, the media is aiding and abetting this, just totally ridiculous,
because who
co-equal
funds the media?
scales of justice.
It's all the same corporations that are invested in war. That like weapons companies and pharmaceutical companies, and it's just like they can't help it. And the media, the Washington Post is owned by Jeff Bezos, who has like contracts with the Pentagon, and it's just like the media the U.S. corporate media is just like a mouthpiece for the State Department at this point, and a mouthpiece for U.S. empire. So it's not at all surprising that you're getting this stuff. And same people who gave us the WMD stories, the same people who gave us Russiagate. Is it really surprising that they're now promoting this talking point about a lab leak? It literally is all you see. American brains are being flooded with this. It's not by accident. Yeah. And actually, I think what's really disturbing about this entire episode is just how quickly all of this propaganda can like by pressing a button just change American public opinion overnight.
Yeah.
That's disturbing. And we see it happen again and again, but
Yeah. Well, and how decontextualized it can be. I've seen a lot of people quoting the guy, it was Christian Anderson, I think, who had written the email to Fauci, these leaked emails from Fauci, and was saying, they thought it was maybe in a lab, and they thought that him and other researchers, they thought that it didn't look right, it didn't look natural. It's interesting to quote that, but that guy actually says he's now more convinced it's a natural origin than he ever has been before, right? So, but people will report one thing but not report the other thing. And, obviously that's a little bit more in the right-wing media, but you just see things brought out in this decontextualized way and kind of thrown out there and never really put in a continuum. And you never really see it put in the context also of why people really died in the United States, which is the fact that the U.S. government didn't do anything, even though it was 100% warned that this terrible situation was actually, coming to the United States. So wherever it came from, they could have prevented hundreds of thousands of people of dying if they wanted
And they
to,
chose not
but they chose not
to.
to.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important piece right there. And, you know, trying to shift that blame off into some other country is certainly useful for them. But I think it's just totally fraudulent.
And it's also been like a little disappointing to see that, you know, obviously this is being propagated by the right, but then there's people on the left as well, or I don't know if you'd say left, but whatever, let's use it as an umbrella term. There's
People
on
can
the
perceive
left
to
as well, perceived to be left, who are also playing into this. And it's disappointing because it's some of the same people who are really good on Russiagate. And it's like, why were you able to see this big propaganda BS like effort on this one issue, but then on China, you can't understand it's the same paradigm.
But
I think that to me suggests that Americans are more primed, you know, to deem or to hate China than they are even Russia. And I'm not sure what that is around that. We should have like an episode.
You know, I mean, it's like those sneaky people over in China or Japan or Vietnam or wherever. I mean, it's one of the oldest tricks in the book. And I think, you know, look, a lot of people might not like it, but I'll just be honest. When you see a lot of people who are coming from these American backgrounds who are like, oh, Russiagate is not whatever, but then they'll believe anything about China. I mean, that to me is a pretty easy explanation because it just seems to me that there's a big difference between the two countries, and Americans have been primed to think forever that Asians are sneaky, that they're super smart, trying to get over on you, that, I mean, all these different, you know, stories that have been spun over the years through the movies, you know, the villains, all these different kinds of things that have been impressed on the view of what Asians and what Asian Americans represent, I think is, you know, the fact that there are so many people who are Asian American people who are arrested as being spies for China. But when you look at it, there's a huge rate of people who are falsely arrested. And just the perception that someone is Chinese, they don't have to be Chinese. Just the perception that they are is enough to have people fall under the suspicion of the FBI on campuses around this country for no other reason other than that. People using WeChat to communicate with their family and friends, not just in China, but around the world and the broader Chinese diaspora, you know, just that alone can be something that can tag you as someone who's potentially a spy because you're a scientist that works at a university. And I think that all those types of things really play into why there's so much potency about China, about North Korea, and that can be transferred to any country. You know, it was in the 80s, a lot of that was on Japan. You know, and people were sort of pushing a lot of the yellow peril as well. So it can be easily transferred to any Asian country because it's been built up over hundreds of years. And it's almost like a secondary reflex, I think, you know, for so much of American discourse to fall back on the idea that those people over there must be doing something sneaky to try to take over the world.
Right. Exactly.
All right. Well, maybe that's a note we should end on.
Tail is all this time.
Fake world domination there. But yeah, I mean, it really is unbelievable. It's a sad thing, but you know, this is the world we live in. And I think it's reminds me of the thing I always point out to people, that agency is real, right? Like when you see all these terrible things going on, it's only when people take action that it can change. Look at Peru, where someone came out of nowhere and became the president, you know, because poor campesinos in the countryside rose up and showed up at the ballot box. And so I think that maybe brings the whole thing full circle, that as many terrible things that there are going there, people have the ability to change them. They have the ability to do something different.
I do want to say, Eugene,
Please.
Before we close,
Please.
I think it's a good moment, because we didn't do this the whole show, for those who are watching and who appreciate our ability to see through not just Russiagate, but as well as Chinagate. A great way to support our endeavor to not be China Gators is to support us on Patreon. Patreon.com/breakthrough news. And I really mean that. I mean, I think that there's definitely too few outlets who are being honest about this new Cold War with China. I think we're one of the few, including on the left. And that's one thing I love about Breakthrough News, is when it comes to anti-imperialism, we don't stop at just one country. Because we're not racist. So that said, again, patreon.com/breakthrough news to support our on the ground reporting, all the interviews that we're doing, and of course, these live streams that we do weekly. And whenever there's crazy news, we do more than weekly. Patreon.com/breakthrough news. Make sure you subscribe to us on YouTube. If you're watching, hit the subscribe button if you haven't already. And that's my end of my little spiel.
No, I appreciate that. I started laughing because when you mentioned not being racist, I realized we didn't touch the Hunter Biden text messages at all tonight. I mean, should we? I don't know if we should leave it. Should we? Did y'all see it? Did you see the text messages?
I saw people
Rania,
talking about it. Honestly, I was just like, I saw people talking about it. I did. And I was like, I mean, I'm not surprised. Like, are you surprised?
Yeah, I mean, it's I'm not surprised. I'm telling you that laptop, if you were Joe Biden's communications team, that is the laptop from hell. Because just obviously this dude was so off the rails. I mean, just for people who don't know, I'll just say it really quickly. He was exchanging texts with his lawyer, who I think he was paying like $800 some an hour. I think I read in the Daily Mail. And I'm trying to describe how I want to describe this. He was basically using the N-word in the context of speaking in Black vernacular to his white attorney. It's like two white guys. Oh, am I breaking up?
Yeah, you were breaking up a little bit, but now you're good.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Well, I was just going to say the basic reality is it's like two white guys talking back and forth about nothing, just, nothing. And one of them pretending to be Black and using the N-word. And the person who was doing that was Hunter Biden. So it's extremely embarrassing for him. Does it really matter in the big scheme of things? I don't know. But it is unbelievable. I don't have him in front of me, so I won't read him. Maybe we'll bring it up another time. But you can look it up yourself.
I only love you because you're Black. That's true. N-word.
True that. N-word.
Wow.
Yeah. He also said, I hope you're not charging me Hennessy prices, which I guess he would know about since he was in the back of the strip club smoking
Hennessy is expensive.
So he must know.
Hennessy is expensive.
He must know. Yeah, apparently they had to come into the little champagne room in the strip club and tell him stop smoking crack because people in other parts of the strip club were like smelling crack and it was messing up their business. So I'm sure he knows all about being overcharged for bottles of liquor. But yeah, I mean, it just shows that he's just an entitled, grown up loser who's only done anything in his life because his dad is super famous, who trades on his father's name for millions and millions of dollars. He's under IRS tax investigation right now for embezzling. I don't feel bad for him. I don't think it's surprising. It is what it is. It's a window into privilege in America. I think that's what the Hunter Biden laptop
like no matter what happens to him, he'll be totally fine because he's rich.
Yeah, it's definitely exactly. And you know what? He'll make more money because he'll be able to trade on the fact that his father was not president.
He'll go on Joe Rogan. He'll go on Joe Rogan.
He will go on Joe Rogan. He'll smoke crack. He will smoke crack on Joe Rogan.
With Joe Rogan.
I'm already annoyed. I can't, you guys. I can't.
I might actually watch that one.
I'm definitely watching that.
Yeah, I would tune in for that.
That works on you.
Jesus. What can I say? If there's anything I really like, Rania, it's watching a white guy with a trust fund go on a bender on a podcast and ruin his career. That
would not ruin his career. That's the point. Is it would make him cool. Everyone would be like, "Oh my God, Hunter Biden went on Joe Rogan and smoked crack. He's so cool. That guy's so edgy."
Hunter Biden is single-handedly making crack cool again. Hunter Biden is
single-handedly all of a sudden, like white people across America, like white upper class people across America will start smoking crack. It'll become like a drug of privilege. And then other people won't be able to buy it because it'll be too expensive. And like, it's just, I mean, I can already, it's the writings on the wall.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what else comes out from this laptop that.
And then he'll get to make merch. He'll make money off of merch.
The story of how that laptop got to that computer store, that's the story I want. If anyone has that story of how that laptop got to that computer store.
It was the Chinese.
It was obviously Chinese.
It was China and Russian
it went to a store that was like definitely owned by a Trump supporter. I mean, everything about that is amazing. Anyway, October surprise. We're going to end the show on that note. As you can see on the bottom, go to patreon.com/breakthrough news. We'll continue to bring you all the important and totally unimportant stories, I guess, since we just talked about so we've got you covered from the things that actually matter in your life to things that you could totally do without knowing. That's what we do here at Breakthrough News. The full gamut of information is just mainlined directly into
without the racism.
Yes, without racism. That is also very important. Anyway, Rania Khalek, as always, it's a pleasure to be with you. Juan in the booth, as always, a pleasure to be with you as well. Shout out to the whole team on Breakthrough for making this happen. And we will see you next week.